Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the gritty life of a medieval castle servant. Far from the fairy tales, the truth is, scrubbing soot from stone walls was the least of their worries. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In your new gig as a medieval castle servant, you'll quickly discover that the only thing more exhausting than a day's work is the delusion that it could ever be romantic. Forget shiny armor and gallant knights. You're more likely to see the underbelly of a horse than a noble steed's saddle. And if you're thinking of earning enough to buy a fancy doublet, well, let's just say you'll be sticking with burlap. Welcome to the world of staggering quantities of labor, where the phrase back-breaking work is less a metaphor and more of a job description. Castles, despite their fairy tale reputation, were essentially fortified cities, bustling with activity and filled with the smells of sweat, smoke, and something that might be dinner. Maintaining these stone behemoths took a village, or at least a few dozen servants like you. Let's talk money, or rather, the lack thereof. If you were lucky enough to be paid in coins, and not just gratitude, or worse, nothing at all, you might earn about a shilling a month. That's around 12 pence, which might stretch to cover some bread, ale, and a threadbare cloak if you're feeling extravagant. But don't worry, at least you get a roof over your head right. That's assuming the drafty, stone enclave where you sleep after a 14-hour day counts as over your head. Now, about that hierarchy. It's not just the lords and ladies who rank above you. There's an entire ecosystem of servitude. The butler, for example, isn't just managing wine cellars, but is also your boss, and he's not afraid to remind you. Then there's the cook, who, despite wielding a ladle, commands the kitchen like a general in battle. If you're a scullion, you're at the bottom of the pecking order. Your job is to clean pots and pans, and by clean, I mean scrub with sand and ashes until your fingers resemble prunes. And if you're a stable boy, the closest you get to chivalry is mucking out stalls for horses who are likely better fed than you. You might be tempted by the myth that these servants formed a tight-knit community, laughing and singing through their chores. In reality, the endless grind left little room for camaraderie. Sure, you might trade a joke or two with your fellow servants, but mostly you're trading jabs about who smells worse after a hard day's work. The social structure was inherently competitive. Everyone eyed the scarce opportunities for advancement with a mix of hope and resentment, and stepping on a few toes to climb the ladder wasn't unheard of. Then there's the matter of sustenance. Meals were basic and monotonous, designed to fuel labor rather than delight the palate. Bread, cheese, and ale were staples, with the occasional addition of pottage, a thick soup that was more about what you could scrounge than any culinary ambition. Forget about feasting on the roasted meats and delicate pastries you might imagine from a medieval banquet. Those were for the nobles. You were more likely to be gnawing on yesterday's crusts. So, what's the appeal of these romanticized tales of contented castle life? It's the allure of simplicity amidst the chaos of modern life. But peel back the layers, and you find a reality that's anything but simple. Complex social dynamics, economic hardship, and physical toil define your daily existence. And yet, these myths persist because, deep down, we like to believe in a world where hard work and loyalty are always rewarded. Spoiler, in medieval times they mostly weren't. While the modern world offers the luxury of choice, life in the castle was dictated by necessity. The caste system required strict adherence to roles, and deviation was hardly tolerated. You do your job, keep your head down, and hope that you might one day rise above your current station. But let's face it, the odds of that happening are about as likely as stumbling upon a dragon in the dungeon. Stories to tell the kids, not something you'd bet your life on. So, as you lay your weary head on what passes for a pillow, dreaming of a better tomorrow might be your best escape from the drudgery of today. Just remember, reality bites, especially when it's served cold in the form of porridge, day after dreary day. As you drift off into a restless slumber on your straw-stuffed mattress, let's take a step back to examine the grind that has brought you here. The life of a medieval castle servant was less about chivalric tales and more about surviving the daily onslaught of tasks that challenged both body and spirit. The working day began not at the leisurely hour of sunrise, but often well before, with the first light of dawn serving as a reminder that your labour was best performed, while the nobility still snoozed in their plush four-poster beds. Your day could stretch beyond 14 hours, and no, there were no labour laws or union reps to call in for a cheeky 5-minute break. If you were lucky, you might sneak a moment to gulp down some thin gruel in between chores. The core of your existence revolved around a dizzying array of duties, with each task as repetitive and monotonous as the one that came before. If you thought the medieval life was filled with exciting adventures, think again. Your excitement for the day might consist of managing not to slice your finger off while chopping onions, or avoiding the wrath of a noble in a foul mood. You see, nobility had this quaint belief that their comfort was paramount, and your suffering was merely collateral damage in the grand scheme of their opulent lives. The stark contrast between their lavish banquets and your meagre potluck of leftovers couldn't be more glaring. While they savoured delicacies with names like roasted swan and pheasant pie, you were left to make do with what was left behind, if anything at all. The economic disparities you faced were not just a matter of missing out on the occasional treat. They defined every aspect of your life. If you were earning a shilling a month, consider yourself fortunate. That princely sum of 12 pence could buy you a few loaves of bread, and perhaps a pint or two of ale to drown your sorrows, though you might need to save for weeks just to afford a new pair of shoes when your current ones inevitably disintegrated from overuse. As if the relentless work and economic hardship weren't enough, the threat of disease loomed like a dark cloud over your meagre existence. Castles weren't exactly the bastions of cleanliness that modern myths like to portray. Sanitation was a concept as foreign as the New World. You could easily find yourself on the wrong end of a medieval ailment like dysentery or the ever-popular plague. With living conditions that were more conducive to breeding rats than comfort, disease spread as quickly as rumours of a lord's scandalous affair. And with little access to effective medical care, catching something as simple as a cold could be a death sentence. Yet, despite the grim realities, the myths of a tight-knit servant community endure. The truth is, when you're spending every waking hour scrubbing, sweeping and serving, there's scant time for the kind of camaraderie that makes for a good story. Sure, you might bond over shared grievances or the occasional jest, but the social atmosphere was more about surviving another day without losing your job or your mind. The pecking order among servants could be as rigid as the castle walls themselves. Everyone was jockeying for a position that offered slightly less toil or slightly better rations, and stepping on your neighbour's toes was sometimes the only way to climb the ladder. The allure of medieval life lies in its perceived simplicity, a world where everyone knew their place and loyalty was supposedly rewarded. But the reality, loyalty was often just a convenient way for the upper echelons to exert control over the lower ranks. The notion of a servant rising to a position of influence was just as fanciful as the idea of finding a dragon in the moat. Economic mobility was about as rare as a sunny day in the English winter. In this world, personal time was a luxury afforded only to those who could afford to be idle. For a servant, leisure was something you heard about in stories, not something you experienced. Every hour not spent working was an hour that could see you replaced by someone younger, stronger, or simply more desperate. The pace was unrelenting, and the pressure to perform without falter was a constant companion. So, as you lay there, hoping for a brief escape into dreams where life might be kinder, remember that the romanticized version of castle life is a construct, a fairy tale that conveniently skips over the grueling day-to-day realities. The real story of medieval servitude is one of endurance, resilience, and the small victories that came from simply making it through another day. This tale continues, with new chapters written in sweat, determination, and the faint hope that perhaps tomorrow the scales of fortune might tip ever so slightly in your favor. As you drift into a fitful sleep, dreaming of a life slightly less grueling, let's peel back the stone walls of the castle to expose the social currents swirling within. Life inside these fortified fortresses wasn't just about surviving the daily grind. It was also about navigating the tricky waters of human relationships. And if you thought your office politics were bad, well, welcome to the medieval version of Game of Thrones. Minus the dragons, but with plenty of backstabbing. Let's start with the castle hierarchy. a social ladder with more rungs than you'd find in a game of snakes and ladders. At the top, you've got the lord and lady of the manor, who acted as the sun that all the other planets, or in this case, servants, orbited. These noble folks held the keys to your livelihood and could make your life as pleasant as a summer's day or as miserable as a wet medieval winter, depending on their whims. Their decisions were often arbitrary, driven by everything from political alliances to personal vendettas. And if you found yourself in their bad books, your prospects were as bright as a dungeon at midnight. Moving down the social ladder, we find the stewards and chamberlains, the right-hand men, and occasionally women, who kept the castle's gears turning. They were the ones who could make or break your day with a simple nod or a raised eyebrow. Think of them as the middle managers of medieval times, constantly juggling the demands of the lords and the grumblings of the servants below. They wielded considerable power, not unlike the modern HR departments that decide your fate at the office Christmas party. Then there are your fellow servants, the cooks, butlers, maids, and stable hands who shared your lot in life. The myth of the tight-knit servant community, bonded in adversity, is about as real as a unicorn grazing in the castle courtyard. Sure, there might have been moments of shared laughter or camaraderie, but more often it was every peasant for themselves. The competition for slightly less terrible tasks was fierce, and alliances could shift faster than a noble's favor. Gossip was the currency of the realm, and knowing who liked whom or who had fallen out of favor could be the difference between a promotion to head scullion or a demotion to latrine duty. But let's not forget the wild card in this deck, the itinerant workers and seasonal help that drifted in and out of the castle like leaves on a breeze. These folks were the gig economy of the medieval world, taking on tasks that the regular staff couldn't handle or didn't want. They brought news from the outside, tales of distant lands, and occasionally a fresh perspective on castle life. But they also stirred the pot, upsetting the delicate balance of power and creating new tensions among the permanent staff. After all, nothing says job security like a stranger rolling into town with skills you lack. Navigating this social landscape required a blend of cunning, charm, and a strategic mind worthy of a chess grandmaster. Flattery was a fine art, and knowing when to offer a compliment or when to hold your tongue could mean the difference between gaining favor or gaining the boot. Take, for instance, the art of handling the castle's cook. This wasn't just about avoiding a ladle to the head. It was about ensuring you didn't end up with the burnt crust of the bread, while others feasted on the soft, fluffy middle. A well-timed word or gesture could ensure you were on the receiving end of a slightly larger portion of pottage, or, if you were very lucky, an extra scrap of meat. Speaking of meat, let's not forget the role of the kitchen in these power plays. The cook was a figure of almost mythical stature, wielding authority over the most crucial aspect of castle life, food. In a world where meals were as monotonous as the tasks, controlling the distribution of food was akin to holding the scepter of power. A good relationship with the cook could mean the difference between sustenance and starvation, making it a relationship worth cultivating, even if it meant swallowing your pride, and whatever else they served you. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or perhaps the rat in the pantry, loyalty. The romanticized idea that servants were unwaveringly devoted to their lords is a narrative spun from the same cloth as fairy tales. In reality, loyalty was often a transaction. Sure, you might be loyal to a kind master who treated you with a modicum of respect, but when push came to shove, survival trumped sentimentality every time. If an opportunity arose to improve your lot, whether through a strategic marriage, a lucky break, or simply being in the right place at the right time, you'd grab it with both hands and a firm grip. In this environment, ambition was both a necessity and a curse. The desire to rise above one's station could motivate you to work harder and smarter, but it also made you a target for those who saw you as a threat. Ambition could drive a wedge between friends, turning allies into adversaries in the blink of an eye. And while the few who managed to climb the social ladder might enjoy a slightly cushier existence, the majority remained firmly rooted in their original positions, their dreams of advancement as fleeting as a summer breeze through an open window. Yet, despite the backstabbing and the endless grind, the dream of a better life kept many servants going. The tantalizing hope that someday, somehow, they might break free from the shackles of servitude was a powerful motivator. It might be a long shot, but it was a sharp nonetheless. And in a world where the odds were rarely in your favor, sometimes a long shot was all you had. As the sun rose each morning, casting its light over the castle's stone walls, those within would rise to face another day of toil and intrigue. They knew that while the castle might shield them from the dangers lurking outside, it also trapped them within its confines, a gilded cage of stone and mortar. But as they went about their tasks, carried with them the whispered stories of servants who had risen above their station, tales spun from half-truths and hope. And in the quiet moments, as they paused to catch their breath, they allowed themselves the luxury of dreaming that they might one day add their own story to the mythos of castle life. So, as the page turns on another day in the life of a medieval castle servant, remember that while the romance of the past might be alluring, the reality was a constant struggle for power, survival, and a glimmer of hope. And as you prepare to delve further into this world of intrigue and ambition, keep in mind that the story of life behind castle walls is far from over. There are still more tales to tell, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. As the sun rises once more over the stone walls of your medieval castle, it's time to dispel some of the myths that have clung to this period like barnacles to a ship. Let's cut straight to the infamous loyal servant trope, an idea as romanticized as it is misleading. If you buy into the notion of the eternally grateful servant, always ready to lay down their life for their noble lord, you've been sold a fairy tale as fictional as a unicorn riding a dragon. In reality, loyalty was often a matter of survival rather than devotion. Picture this. Your livelihood depended on the whims of your lord, whose mood swings could make a pendulum look stable. Loyalty, then, was less about admiration and more about ensuring you didn't find yourself tossed out on your burlap-clad backside. The medieval chronicles might paint servants as devoted followers, but dig into primary sources like manorial records, and a different picture emerges. Reports of servants deserting their posts for better opportunities, or simply to escape a particularly tyrannical master, were not uncommon. In 1381, for instance, a wave of peasant revolts across England saw scores of servants abandon their feudal obligations, driven by the harsh economic realities and oppressive demands of their overlords. And why wouldn't they? The opportunities for upward mobility were about as common as a snowstorm in July. This wasn't a world where you could climb the corporate ladder by working hard and playing nice. Instead, society was a rigidly stratified pyramid where the top tiers were reserved for those with the right birthright or connections. Your average medieval servant faced a ceiling so low it could double as a dungeon. The rare tales of servants rising through the ranks to positions of influence often involved extraordinary circumstances or a fortuitous twist of fate. Think of them as the medieval lottery winners. Consider the case of Richard Whiting, a notorious runaway servant from the 14th century who managed to flee his manor duties, only to be caught and returned to his lord's estate. His tale wasn't unique. It was a reflection of a broader socio-economic pressure cooker where the majority of people were shackled to their roles by necessity, not choice. The feudal system was less about upward mobility and more about keeping everyone in their place, like a human chessboard where the pawns rarely, if ever, became queens. Speaking of chess, let's talk about the strategic maneuvering required to even entertain the notion of advancement. In a world devoid of LinkedIn profiles and networking events, your best bet for upward mobility was through marriage, a well-placed favor, or sheer dumb luck. Servants often relied on forming alliances, not unlike modern office politics, to better their situation. But let's be honest, the odds were about as favorable as finding a four-leaf clover in the dead of winter. Even when a servant did manage to catch a break, it rarely led to a full escape from servitude. Instead, it might mean a marginally less grueling position or the chance to work directly under a more benevolent master. Take the example of a chambermaid who might dream of becoming a lady's maid, a position slightly higher up the servant food chain, offering a glimpse of the finery and privilege that lay just beyond reach. But remember, the line between aspiration and reality was as thin as the gruel served at supper. And while we're dispelling myths, let's talk about the notion of contentment in servitude. It's tempting to romanticize the simplicity of medieval life, imagining servants gathered around the hearth, singing songs of yore. But in truth, The daily grind often left little room for such idyllic scenes. The back-breaking labor, coupled with the constant threat of disease and the precarious nature of employment, meant that most servants were more concerned with survival than serenades. So why do these myths persist? Perhaps it's the allure of a simpler time, a longing for a world where everyone knew their place and hard work was rewarded. But the reality was far grittier and more complex. The medieval servant's life was a delicate dance between maintaining favor, avoiding missteps, and seizing the rare opportunity for a better lot, all under the ever-watchful eyes of those who held the reins of power. As we peel back the layers of these romanticized tales, it's crucial to remember that history isn't just about what happened, it's about who tells the story. The chronicles that have reached us were often written by those with a vested interest in portraying a harmonious social order. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a world teeming with tensions and struggles, where the reality of servitude was a far cry from the chivalric legends we love to recount. So, as you continue your journey through the annals of medieval life, keep an eye out for the untold stories and the voices that history often overlooks. Remember that behind every romanticized tale lies a complex web of human experiences, each as varied and vivid as the lives we lead today. And as we uncover these stories, let's not just revel in the myths, but strive to understand the realities they obscure. The story of the medieval servant is far from over, and as we turn the page, let's delve deeper into the world that shaped these lives, one revelation at a time. So, what do we take away from a life spent scrubbing floors while dreaming of roasted pheasant you'll never taste? Let's dive into the legacy of medieval servitude and see why this ancient grind still echoes in our modern world. Spoiler alert, it's not all about nostalgia for chainmail and jousting tournaments. First, let's get to the heart of the matter, social mobility, or the frustrating lack of it. The rigid class system of medieval times wasn't just a social quirk. It was the cement that held feudal society together. Servitude was less a career choice and more a life sentence for most. Your role was set from birth, with about as much wiggle room as a knight in full armor. The medieval system was designed to keep you in your place, and it did so with remarkable efficiency. The numbers speak for themselves. In the 14th century, an estimated 90% of the European population were peasants or serfs tied to the land. The chances of climbing the social ladder were about as slim as finding a dragon's egg in your breakfast porridge. But why should we care about this historical dead end? Because, believe it or not, the echoes of feudal servitude resonate in today's working world. While we no longer toil under the threat of a lord's displeasure, many modern workers still find themselves trapped in cycles of low-wage jobs with limited prospects for advancement. According to a 2021 report by the Economic Policy Institute, over 40% of American workers earn less than $15 per hour, highlighting the persistence of economic inequality. The medieval servant's plight reminds us that while the tools have changed, the struggle for upward mobility remains all too familiar. Now let's talk economics. The medieval economy was a patchwork of barter, local markets, and the occasional coin, with labor as the primary currency. In this world, the value of a servant wasn't measured in career growth or personal fulfillment, but in sheer output. Sound familiar? Today's gig economy, with its flexible hours and lack of benefits, echoes this medieval mindset. The hustle culture of the 21st century, where more hours mean more pay but not necessarily more security, feels like the digital age's answer to feudalism. In both eras, the laborer is king, but the kingdom is made of sand. And what about the myth of the loyal servant, you ask? Well, let's face it, loyalty is a slippery concept, whether you're in a castle or a cubicle. In medieval times, loyalty was transactional. You were loyal as long as it served your interests, or until a better offer came along, like a slightly less oppressive lord, or, heaven forbid, a pay raise. Fast forward to today, and while we're not exactly plotting to flee our jobs for the next manor over, the principle holds. A 2018 LinkedIn study found that younger workers changed jobs roughly every 2 to 3 years, driven by a quest for better opportunities and working conditions. It seems that the medieval notion of loyalty as a survival tactic is alive and well, albeit wrapped in the guise of career advancement. Why do these myths of medieval servitude endure, then? Perhaps it's the allure of a simpler time, a world where castles loom large and everyone knows their place. But beneath the romantic veneer lies a stark reality. A life of servitude was one of endurance, not adventure. The appeal lies in the fantasy of certainty and structure, a world where hard work was your primary asset, even if it rarely led to the rewards we like to imagine. The truth is, the medieval servant's life was as predictable as it was punishing, and perhaps that predictability is the comfort we crave in our chaotic, modern lives. As we wrap up this journey through the stone corridors of history, let's not forget the enduring power dynamics at play. The medieval servant's existence was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit, navigating a world where the deck was stacked against them. Their stories remind us that while the trappings of our lives have changed, the fundamental quest for dignity, opportunity, and a better life remains universal. So, the next time you hear tales of gallant knights and castle feasts, remember the servants who scrubbed those stone floors and kept the fires burning. They are the unsung heroes of history, whose lives were a testament to survival against the odds. And as you navigate your own modern-day fiefdoms, whether in the corporate world or the gig economy, take a moment to appreciate the echoes of the past that still shape our present. Because in the end, whether you're wielding a mop or a mouse, we're all just trying to make it through another day with a little dignity and maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of hope for a brighter tomorrow. Sunrise spills over Tyre's ancient rooftops, and you're already up, ready to ply your trade as a Carthaginian merchant in this bustling Phoenician city. Morning in Tyre smells like opportunity, seasoned with a whiff of the Mediterranean and a hint of that famous Tyrian purple dye. This little coastal powerhouse isn't just a pretty face with its grand temples and sturdy stone walls. It's the beating heart of Mediterranean trade, and you're right in the thick of it. Your morning routine is a tapestry of sounds and sights. You hear the clamor of vendors setting up stalls, the lowing of oxen pulling carts, and the occasional squawk of a seagull, an avian reminder of the sea's constant presence. You gulp down a quick breakfast of flatbread and olives, food that's as practical as it is traditional. No time for a leisurely meal when there's commerce to conduct. Let's talk about that Tyrian purple for a moment. It's the kind of luxury item that makes rich Romans swoon and their wallets open wide. Extracted from the murex snail, it takes a whopping 8,000 of these little critters to produce just 1 gram of dye. No wonder it's worth more than its weight in gold. Tyre's monopoly on this dye is one of the reasons it's so loaded with cash and clout. And as a merchant, you're part of that vibrant economy. But let's not romanticize too much. Those snails don't harvest themselves, and the smell from the dye workshops would make even a seasoned fisherman gag. You step onto the narrow, cobblestone streets, dodging a donkey carrying amphorae filled with olive oil from Crete. Olive oil is another hot commodity, lubricating the cogs of commerce as smoothly as it does a salad. Tyre's strategic location, smack dab in the middle of ancient trade routes, means anything that can be bought or sold passes through here. The city is like a giant open-air market where Egyptians, Greeks, and Phoenicians haggle over goods with all the subtlety of a street brawl. Let's take a second to appreciate the geopolitical chessboard of your time. The Mediterranean isn't just a sea, it's a superhighway of trade. Tyre sits at the intersection of cultures and economies, a literal crossroads of the ancient world. This city's wealth isn't just built on purple dye. It's built on its ability to play nice with everyone from the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt to the Seleucid Empire in the east. It's a delicate balance you, as a merchant, have to navigate daily. As you make your way to the docks, you see the harbor teeming with ships from all over the Mediterranean. Some vessels are laden with Spanish silver or Egyptian papyrus. Others bring grain from Sicily or wine from Greece. Each ship is a floating testament to the complex web of trade that Tyre is at the center of. Think of it as an ancient version of global shipping, albeit with more sails and significantly less GPS. Speaking of which, navigation is less about compasses and more about stars. Your ship's captain is basically a rock star for his ability to read the celestial map and avoid getting you all stranded on some forsaken island. A typical journey might take weeks, depending on the wind, the weather, and whether Poseidon had his morning coffee. Sea travel in the 2nd century BC is an adventure on its own, a perilous endeavor that makes every safe arrival feel like a small miracle. The docks are a cacophony of activity, sailors shouting, merchants haggling, and the occasional argument as deals go sour faster than a bowl of milk in the summer sun. You're here to check on a shipment of tin from the Iberian Peninsula, crucial for making bronze. The price of tin fluctuates more than the mood of a Roman senator, thanks to supply routes constantly threatened by pirates and political upheaval. By mid-morning, your sandals are dusty, your purse is a bit lighter from buying lunch, a simple meal of dried figs and cheese from a nearby vendor. The figs are sweet, the cheese sharp, and both are reminders of the regional specialties that make trade in Tyre so diverse and dynamic. The economy here isn't just about luxury goods, it's a complex dance of necessities and niceties, each with its own supply chain that could unravel with one wrong political move or a poorly timed storm. And speaking of politics, let's not forget that Tyre is technically under the thumb of the Seleucid Empire, though it maintains a level of autonomy thanks to its economic importance. The city's leaders are master diplomats, balancing local needs with imperial demands. As a merchant, you have to be part diplomat, part economist, and sometimes part gambler, betting on the winds of political change as much as the actual wind that fills the sails of your ships. It's easy to romanticize ancient trade as a never-ending adventure of exotic goods and daring voyages, but the reality is far grittier. Trade is as much about the drudgery of bookkeeping and the headaches of logistics as it is about the thrill of discovery. You've got ledgers to maintain, deals to negotiate, and competitors to outwit. And let's not forget the ever-present danger of piracy. Those guys are the original disruptors, and not in the fun Silicon Valley way. As afternoon sets in, you visit a workshop where workers are pounding away at raw metal, crafting everything from jewelry to weapons. It's a reminder that trade isn't just about moving goods, it's about transforming them. Tyre's artisans are renowned for their skills, turning raw materials into coveted items. The clang of hammers and the hiss of hot metal in water are the soundtrack of ancient innovation. You've spent the day weaving through the hustle and bustle of Tyre, your mind as active as the markets you navigate. Every transaction, every conversation is a piece of the larger economic tapestry that makes this city thrive. By evening, as the day cools and the sun dips below the horizon, you find yourself back at home. The day's deals and details swirl in your mind, each a thread in the complex web of commerce that connects Tyre to the wider world. As you unwind with a cup of watered wine, a practical choice, given the unpredictability of ancient water sources, you reflect on the day. The romantic image of the merchant adventurer is tempered by the reality of hard work, risk, and strategy. But it's all in a day's work in this vibrant, chaotic, and utterly captivating city. Tomorrow, you'll do it all over again, navigating the ever-shifting waters of ancient trade from your strategic perch in Tyre. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting Tyre in swathes of orange and purple, you find yourself reflecting on the day's maze of commerce with a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. But hold on to your sandals, because the real action is just getting started. The market, my friend, awaits. The marketplace is Tyre's beating heart, throbbing with the energy of 1,000 transactions. Picture this, stalls crammed with goods from the farthest reaches of the known world. You've got saffron from distant Persia, its threads more precious than a Roman senator's toga. Then there's cinnamon from India, so valued it could buy a small plot of land. And that's not even scratching the surface. There's tin from Iberia, Egyptian linens, and Greek amphorae filled with wine that'll knock your sandals off. Let's talk money, which, despite the allure of bartering, rules the roost here. Currency is a mixed bag of silver ingots and coins, each transaction a delicate dance of weighing and calculating. Silver is the gold standard, pun intended, because it's universally recognized. But coins are the new kids on the block, offering convenience and standardization. You see, while silver's value depends on weight and purity, coins have a set face value, making life easier for everyone from merchants to the market's tax collectors, who are as popular as a rainy day at sea. The marketplace is more than just about goods and currency. It's a social circus, a cacophony of languages and cultures. Greeks, Phoenicians, Egyptians, they're all here, each with their unique flair for haggling. Picture a Babylonian merchant trying to sell his textiles. He'll swear on his grandmother's life that his silk is the finest, and you'd better believe it, or at least pretend to until the price is right. Haggling is an art form, a theatrical performance where a keen eye and a steady hand can save you, or make you, a fortune. And then there are the social dynamics, a veritable soap opera of alliances and rivalries. You've got Greeks eyeing Egyptians with suspicion, while Phoenicians play the neutral ground, facilitating deals with the finesse of a diplomat. It's a masterclass in ancient networking, where knowing who to flatter or who to avoid can make or break your day. It's not just about what you know, but who you know, and in this market, social currency is as valuable as the silver in your purse. But let's not get too starry-eyed. There's a gritty side to this bustling bazaar. Thieves lurk in the crowd, their fingers as nimble as any acrobat. The threat of pickpockets is as constant as the Mediterranean breeze, and you've got to keep one eye on your goods and the other on your purse. And then there's the smell, an olfactory symphony of spices, sweat, and something that can only be described as the essence of humanity. Romantic? Maybe. Practical? Hardly. Let's dig into the numbers, which are the true language of trade. A pound of saffron might fetch you 15 silver shekels, a small fortune in these parts. Meanwhile, a bolt of Egyptian linen could cost you 20 drachmas, which, converted into silver, makes your head spin faster than a potter's wheel. The cost of tin fluctuates with the whims of supply routes, while spices are priced like liquid gold. These aren't just numbers. They're the pulse of the economy, dictating everything from the price of bread to the fortunes of empires. Speaking of prices, let's pause to consider the logistical nightmare that is ancient trade. Transporting goods isn't just about loading them onto a ship. It's a gamble with fate. Pirates are the original disruptors, turning peaceful voyages into high-seas dramas. And let's not forget the weather, which could swing from calm to chaos faster than you can say Poseidon's wrath. Every shipment is a bet against the odds, and every successful delivery a minor miracle. But amidst the hustle, there's innovation. Tyre's artisans are the unsung heroes, transforming raw materials into treasures that fill the market stalls. Bronze tools, intricately carved jewelry, textiles dyed with that infamous Tyrian purple, all crafted with a skill that's part science, part art. Their work isn't just about creating products. It's about adding value, turning ordinary into extraordinary. The clang of hammers and the hiss of dies in vats are the soundtrack of progress, a reminder that trade isn't just about movement, but transformation. As evening settles, you've navigated deals, dodged thieves, and perhaps even made a friend or two. You've haggled over prices, weighed silver against coinage, and witnessed the cultural tapestry that makes Tyre's market a living, breathing entity. The day's fatigue is tempered by the thrill of commerce, the knowledge that this ancient marketplace is more than a hub of trade. It's a microcosm of the ancient world, a place where goods, cultures, and ideas collide in a beautiful, chaotic dance. But don't hang up your merchant's cap just yet. Tomorrow is another day, another chance to dive back into the whirlpool of trade, where fortunes are made and lost, and where the story of ancient commerce continues to unfold. Keep your wits sharp, your purse close, and your mind open, because in Tyre, the marketplace never sleeps, and neither, it seems, do the opportunities it presents. Just as you think you've wrapped your head around the chaotic dance of Tyre's marketplace, the sun slips higher in the sky, not unlike a merchant's profits on a good day. But midday isn't just about the market. It's also when the political puppeteers start pulling the strings, and boy, are these strings tangled. Let's get into the juicy stuff. Carthage and Rome, the ancient equivalent of a heavyweight title fight. You're a Carthaginian merchant, and this rivalry isn't just a backdrop. It's the canvas on which your entire business is painted. Carthage has been butting heads with Rome since Hannibal took his elephants for a stroll across the Alps. And although that particular circus act is in the past, the tension is as fresh as today's bread. This clash of titans affects everything, from the price of your olive oil to the routes your ships can safely sail. Treaties. Oh, they're plentiful, with more strings attached than a marionette. The Treaty of Lutatius, signed in 241 BC, ended the First Punic War and forced Carthage to cough up 200 talents of silver to Rome over 10 years. That's enough silver to finance a small army, and it's a debt you feel every time you haggle over a sack of grain. And don't get me started on tariffs. Rome's got a knack for squeezing every last denarius out of you with taxes that could make a Spartan cry. You're navigating a maze of customs duties, each more convoluted than the last, designed to fill Roman coffers while emptying yours. It's a masterclass in fiscal frustration, and you're the unwilling student. But here's the kicker. Political alliances can change faster than a chameleon on a rainbow. One moment, Carthage and some Mediterranean city-state are best buds. The next, they're at each other's throats. It's like watching a soap opera where treaties and alliances dictate who's in, who's out, and who gets to trade without ending up in a pirate's hold. Speaking of pirates, they're the uninvited guests at this geopolitical banquet, the original party crashers. They're not just in it for the loot. They're a tool of economic warfare. Rome and Carthage both have been known to turn a blind eye, or even offer a sly wink, to piracy if it means disrupting the other's trade routes. It's espionage with a side of economic sabotage, a game of high seas hide-and-seek with your profits as the prize. Now, let's debunk a myth that sailed through the ages like a ship with a broken rudder, the idea of a peaceful Mediterranean trade. Romantic, right. Picture serene seas and friendly merchants sharing a drink. The reality, more like a cutthroat competition where everyone's got a dagger hidden in their toga. The Mediterranean is a battlefield, not a playground, where every ship's captain has to be part sailor, part spy, and part diplomat. Here's a nugget of truth that might be hard to swallow. Economic espionage is as old as commerce itself. Rome spies on Carthage, Carthage spies on Rome, and everyone's trying to nab the best trade secrets. You've got informants in taverns, whispers in the wind, and coded messages that would make a modern cryptographer break a sweat. It's a shadowy world where knowledge isn't just power, it's currency. As a merchant, you're in the thick of it, navigating not just seas but secrets. You've got to know which palms to grease, which ears to bend, and when to keep your mouth shut. It's a delicate dance, and one misstep could see you out of business, or worse. It's a world where loyalty is as fluid as the ocean, and trust is a luxury few can afford. And let's not forget the cultural chess game. Carthage is a melting pot, a blend of Phoenician roots and African influences, while Rome is a growing juggernaut of ambition and expansion. These cultural identities clash and conspire, creating a patchwork of alliances and animosities that could give a historian whiplash. Your job is to navigate these cultural currents with the grace of a tightrope walker. So, as you stand on the docks, the sun beating down and the scent of salt in the air, remember this. Your trade isn't just about goods. It's about navigating a complex web of politics and power plays. It's a high-stakes game where the rules change with the tides, and every transaction is a gamble. But hey, what's a little risk when there's profit to be made, right? Keep your eyes sharp and your wits sharper, because in this world the only constant is change, and the only certainty is uncertainty. The Mediterranean is a sea of opportunity, but it's also a sea of challenges, and as a Carthaginian merchant, you've got to be ready for anything. So, sail on, my friend, sail on, because in Tyre, the journey is just as important as the destination. And just like that, the call of the sea beckons. Your thoughts drift from the bustling market of Tyre to the vast expanse of the Mediterranean, where the real drama of ancient trade unfolds. Organizing a trade voyage in the 2nd century BC is no small feat. It's like planning a wedding where both the bride and groom are notorious for eloping with pirates. You're not just a merchant, you're the ringmaster of a nautical circus. Let's start with the ships themselves. Forget about modern cargo containers or sleek yachts. Your options are a bit more rustic. Enter the trireme, the Ferrari of ancient warships. With 3 tiers of oars, these bad boys can reach speeds of up to 9 knots, lightning fast by ancient standards. But don't get too excited. These ships are built for speed in battle, not for leisurely cruises. For your commercial ventures, you're more likely to commandeer a merchant galley, a sturdy workhorse designed to haul goods, not chase down foes. Now, onto the crew. A ship's crew in ancient times is a motley crew of the willing, the pressed, and the downright desperate. Imagine trying to manage a group of sailors who are part-time traders, part-time adventurers, and full-time troublemakers. You'll need about 200 rowers for a trireme, while a merchant vessel requires fewer hands, but with more expertise in navigating treacherous waters. Your captain is the star of the show, a salty sea dog who can read the stars better than a fortune teller with a crystal ball. Speaking of navigation, let's debunk a myth. Forget about maps. You're relying on the stars, the coastline, and the whims of the wind. The Mediterranean Sea might sound romantic, but it's a misnomer. It's more like the Mediterranean minefield. Your captain uses the North Star as his guide, and if the weather turns or the clouds obscure the sky, you're as lost as a Roman senator without his toga. But here's the kicker. Piracy. These aren't your Hollywood pirates with parrots and peg legs. These guys are the original disruptors, lurking in hidden coves and ready to pounce on unsuspecting ships. The Aegean Sea is a notorious hotspot where pirates are as common as seagulls. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, where you have to outsmart, outrun, or occasionally outbribe these seafaring bandits. And then there's the weather, the wild card that can make or break your voyage. A storm on the Mediterranean can turn a routine journey into a high-stakes survival saga. The winds, known as the Etesian winds, blow predictably in summer, but come winter, they can turn on you faster than a disgruntled customer at the market. Every sailor knows the phrase, fair winds and following seas, is more wishful thinking than reality. Let's talk about the technological innovations that make all this possible. The trireme, with its advanced hull design and efficient oar system, is a marvel of ancient engineering. It can turn on a dime, perfect for naval battles and for avoiding those pesky pirates. Meanwhile, the merchant ships are built for durability, with broad hulls that can withstand heavy loads and rough seas. Each ship is a testament to the ingenuity of ancient shipbuilders, who knew how to balance speed with stability, a skill that's as much art as science. Then there are the maritime laws, the unsung heroes of ancient trade. These laws dictate everything from the division of spoils in case of piracy to the resolution of disputes between traders. They're the ancient equivalent of the Geneva Convention, ensuring that even in a world of chaos, there's a semblance of order. Violate these laws, and you might find yourself in a world of hurt, or at the very least, a world of lawsuits. Now, let's not forget the economic implications of these voyages. A successful trade trip can make or break a merchant's fortune. You're not just transporting goods, you're transporting wealth, culture, and influence across the known world. The stakes are high, and so are the rewards. A shipment of tin from Iberia, wine from Greece, or spices from the East can fetch prices that would make a modern stockbroker swoon. As you stand on the deck, the wind in your hair and the sea spray on your face, you realize that every voyage is a gamble. It's a roll of the dice, where the odds are as unpredictable as the sea itself. But isn't that part of the allure? The thrill of the unknown, the promise of profit, and the adventure that awaits beyond the horizon. It's a siren call that's as seductive now as it was millennia ago. But as the sun sets, and the sky turns to a tapestry of stars, you know that the journey is far from over. The evening brings a new set of challenges and opportunities. The sea, much like the marketplace, never sleeps. It's a constant, ever-changing stage where fortunes are made and lost, and where the story of ancient trade continues to unfold. So, keep your eyes on the horizon and your ear to the ground, or rather the sea. Because in Tyre, there's always another adventure waiting, another deal to be struck, and another day in the life of a Carthaginian merchant to be lived. The Mediterranean is your playground, your battlefield, and your home. And as long as there are ships to sail and goods to trade, your story is far from finished. As you step off the ship, the salt still clinging to your skin like a clingy toga, you find yourself reflecting on the intricate tapestry of commerce that Tyre weaves. A tapestry that isn't just about goods or gold, but about culture, language, and religion. This city isn't merely a trade hub. It's a cultural kaleidoscope, where every twist in the economic narrative is mirrored by a shift in artistic expression, linguistic evolution, and spiritual practice. Let's start with art, shall we? In Tyre, commerce isn't just a transaction, it's an inspiration. The exchange of goods brings with it a cross-pollination of ideas, and Tyrian art is a testament to that. When you walk down the streets, you can see murals and sculptures that borrow elements from Egyptian, Greek, and even Mesopotamian styles. It's as if the artists here have a global palette, picking and choosing influences like a master chef at a well-stocked spice market. Take the intricate mosaics, for instance, each tiny piece of stone a story, each pattern a testament to the cultural confluence that defines Tyre. These aren't just pretty pictures, they are visual history books, chronicling the city's role as a melting pot of the ancient world. Now, let's talk language. The bustling marketplace is a symphony of sounds, a blend of tongues that would make a polyglot's heart sing. You've got Phoenician, the lingua franca of trade, mingling with Greek, the language of philosophy and politics, and Egyptian, the tongue of the pharaohs. It's linguistic jazz, where traders riff off each other's languages, creating a pidgin that's as dynamic as the trade routes themselves. This isn't just about communication, it's about connection, about creating a shared vocabulary that bridges the gap between cultures and continents. But the cultural exchange extends beyond art and language. It seeps into the very fabric of spirituality. Tyre's temples are a testament to this, with dedications not only to Phoenician deities like Melkart, but also to Egyptian gods like Isis and Greek heroes like Heracles. It's a religious buffet, where the divine is as diverse as the goods on display in the market. This isn't about syncretism for its own sake. It's a reflection of the interconnectedness that trade fosters. When you exchange goods, you exchange beliefs, and Tyre's pantheon is a living, breathing embodiment of cultural fusion. Yet, as you stroll through the city, it's crucial to keep your romantic notions in check. Sure, ancient merchants might seem like the original globetrotters, swashbuckling through seas and markets with the flair of Indiana Jones, but strip away the rose-tinted glasses, and you'll find a reality that's less about adventure and more about survival. These merchants, including yourself, are economic gladiators, fighting not for glory but for profit, not with swords but with scales and ledgers. It's a harsh truth that shadows the myth of the carefree merchant adventurer. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the romanticized legacy of ancient trade. The idea that merchants were the unsung heroes of civilization, spreading culture and enlightenment wherever they went, is a narrative that's as seductive as it is simplistic. The reality, merchants were indeed cultural conduits, but their primary motive was profit, not patronage. The spread of ideas was often an unintended byproduct of the quest for wealth. The silk and spices, the dyes and metals, these were the stars of the show, not the abstract ideals of cultural exchange. But let's not dismiss the impact of this accident of economics. The diffusion of culture might not have been the merchants' intention, but it was undeniably their legacy. The linguistic, artistic, and religious exchanges they facilitated laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we know today. In essence, these traders were the unwitting architects of globalization, centuries before the term was even coined. Fast forward to modern economics, and you'll see the echoes of Tyrian trade practices resonating through time. The concept of supply and demand, the importance of strategic location, the inevitability of market fluctuations, these ancient principles are still the bedrock of commerce today. Tyre's bustling marketplace was a microcosm of the global economy, a tangible lesson in the complexities of trade that still holds relevance in our digital age. So, as you make your way home, sun setting in a blaze of color that mirrors Tyrian purple, you're left pondering the legacy of your day-to-day toil. It's a legacy that's as layered as the city itself, a blend of myth and reality, of romance and pragmatism. You're a merchant, yes, but you're also a bridge builder, a conduit of culture, an accidental pioneer in the grand narrative of human history. As the day fades into night, you settle into your home, the echoes of the marketplace still reverberating in your mind. Your ledger might be filled with numbers, but your thoughts are filled with the stories those numbers tell. Stories of trade and transformation, of cultural exchange and economic evolution. It's a full-circle journey, from the bustling heart of Tyre to the quiet corners of your home, leaving you with a nuanced understanding of your place in this ancient, yet ever-relevant world of trade. And as you sip your watered wine, the day's weariness giving way to contemplation, you realize that the legacy of Tyre isn't just in the goods it traded or the wealth it amassed. It's in the connections it forged, the cultures it bridged, and the human spirit it captured. A legacy that continues to resonate through the ages, reminding us that in the grand tapestry of history, every thread, no matter how humble, contributes to the whole. So here's to you, the Carthaginian merchant, the unsung hero of the ancient world. As you rest, know that your story is far from over, and that in the bustling streets of Tyre, the dance of trade continues, weaving a narrative as rich and vibrant as the city itself. Sleep well, for tomorrow, the marketplace awaits, with new challenges, new opportunities, and new stories waiting to be told. In a world where fertile land was as scarce as a decent Wi-Fi signal at a coffee shop, the Phoenicians, nestled in what is now Lebanon, had no choice but to turn their gaze seaward. Around 1550 BCE, these crafty folks, lacking in arable real estate, decided to flip their geographical misfortunes into a maritime empire that would make even modern logistic companies blush with envy. Forget about growing wheat or tending to livestock. Phoenicians were too busy perfecting the art of seafaring and transforming their corner of the Mediterranean into a bustling trade hub. Now, let's talk geography. Ancient Phoenicia was a sliver of territory hemmed in by the Lebanon mountains on one side and the Mediterranean Sea on the other, like a sandwich, but with mountains and sea instead of bread. This narrow strip, about 200 kilometers long and less than 30 kilometers wide, wasn't exactly the Garden of Eden. The soil was rocky, the arable land negligible, and the rivers, well, let's just say they were more like trickles. But what Phoenicia lacked in farmland, it more than made up for with its strategic seaside location, which was perfect for launching ships, and taking over the world one trade route at a time. Enter the Phoenician city-states, Tyre and Sidon, the twin powerhouses of this ancient maritime league. These cities weren't just places on a map. They were buzzing epicenters of activity, commerce, and innovation. Think of them as the Silicon Valleys of their time, minus the beanbag chairs and tech moguls in hoodies. Sidon was the elder statesman of the two, with a history that could make even the most ancient of historians reach for their spectacles. Meanwhile, Tyre was the brash upstart, perched on an island just off the coast, which made it both a fortress and a jewel in the Phoenician crown. The Phoenicians were not content with merely living near the sea. They practically lived on it. Their shipbuilding skills were second to none, and they crafted vessels that could withstand the temperamental moods of the Mediterranean. These ships weren't just any old boats. They were sleek, nimble, and capable of long voyages. Imagine a canoe on steroids, capable of crossing vast distances to trade goods that would make any ancient merchant drool with anticipation. Speaking of goods, let's talk purple dye. Ah, the color purple, once a symbol of royalty, and now a reminder of just how far we've come in terms of dye technology. The Phoenicians hit the jackpot when they discovered how to produce a rich purple dye from the murex snail, a sea creature that, quite frankly, probably never imagined it would become the cornerstone of an entire economy. Producing this dye was no small feat. It was a painstaking process that involved extracting the secretion from thousands of snails just to dye a single garment. Talk about a labor of love, but the payoff was worth it. This dye was so sought after that it became synonymous with wealth and power across the ancient world. Of course, navigating the Mediterranean wasn't all smooth sailing, literally. This was no leisurely cruise. It was a high-stakes operation where a wrong turn could mean finding oneself in hostile waters, or worse, not finding land at all. The Phoenicians were masters of the sea, using stars to guide their journeys long before GPS made it cool. They developed advanced navigation techniques, and their ships were equipped with a keen sense of where they were going, even if the maps of the time were more here-be-monsters than Google Maps precision. Now, let's pause for a moment and consider the hustle. The Phoenicians weren't just traders. They were the original networkers, establishing outposts and colonies across the Mediterranean. From Cyprus to Sicily, and from Sardinia to the distant shores of Spain, they were the social butterflies of the ancient world, leaving behind a trail of commerce, culture, and a splash of that famous purple wherever they went. Their knack for commerce was legendary, and their ability to adapt to different cultures made them the ultimate chameleons of their time. But let's not romanticize this too much. The life of a Phoenician trader was not all exotic ports and smooth transactions. Piracy was a constant threat, and rival city-states often looked at Phoenician prosperity with envy and sharp swords. Yet, despite the odds, these seafaring entrepreneurs managed to build a network that was as resilient as it was expansive, a testament to their ingenuity and sheer determination. So there you have it. The Phoenicians, those ancient navigators who turned the Mediterranean into their personal highway. They took what little they had, an unfavorable geography and a bunch of snails, and spun it into gold, or at least into a vibrant shade of purple that ruled the ancient world. As we delve deeper into their story, remember that behind every great civilization is a tale of audacity, innovation, and the occasional murex snail. And as we sail onward through the Mediterranean waters of history, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Phoenician trade. If you thought purple dye was their only claim to fame, you're in for a treat, or at least a shipload of fascinating facts. The Phoenicians were the ancient world's economic juggernauts, trading in everything from timber to glass, with the efficiency that would put our modern supply chains to shame. Move over, Amazon Prime. These ancient merchants had their own version of next-day delivery, minus the drones. Let's start with timber. Now, before you yawn and click away, consider this. In a world that was literally built on wooden ships, having access to prime quality timber was like owning the golden goose. The cedar trees of Lebanon were their crown jewels, tall, sturdy, and perfect for everything from shipbuilding to palatial construction. The Egyptians, for instance, couldn't get enough of this wood, using it to construct temples, and of course, those fancy royal barges for pharaohs' leisurely cruises along the Nile. The Bible even gives a shout-out to these cedar trees in the construction of Solomon's temple. Talk about ancient influencer marketing. But timber was just the beginning. The Phoenicians were also pioneers in glass-making. Yes, those delicate little trinkets that stand the test of time, or at least until your toddler finds them. They discovered how to create transparent glass around 1500 BCE, which, let's face it, was as revolutionary then as smartphones are today. Their glass products were highly sought after, with beads and vessels making their way to markets across the Mediterranean. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of Apple products, sleek, elegant, and slightly overpriced, but oh so desirable. And then there were the luxury items. The Phoenicians were the go-to merchants for exotic goods that made the rich and powerful feel, well, rich and powerful. Spices, precious metals, and textiles from as far as India and Arabia found their way onto Phoenician ships. These items were like the Louis Vuitton bags of the ancient world, exclusive, eye-catching, and a subtle way to say, yes, I am better than you. But how did they pull this off? The nuts and bolts of their trading network were as intricate as a Swiss watch. The Phoenicians were the masters of establishing colonies, Carthage being their star outpost. Founded around 814 BCE, Carthage was strategically perched on the North African coast, controlling the trade routes between the eastern and western Mediterranean. It's like they had a monopoly board and kept landing on Boardwalk and Park Place. Carthage grew into a bustling metropolis, boasting a population of over 400,000 at its height, and served as a major hub for the exchange of goods, culture, and ideas. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous realities of ancient trade. The Mediterranean was a rough neighborhood, with piracy and hostile takeovers being as common as bad traffic on a Monday morning. The Phoenicians had to constantly navigate these treacherous waters, literally and figuratively. Their business acumen, however, was unparalleled. They developed sophisticated accounting systems, standardizing weights and measures long before anyone thought to invent the metric system. They had to be meticulous. After all, a miscalculation could mean the difference between profit and a very public financial flop. Yet, what truly set the Phoenicians apart was their incredible adaptability. They were not merely traders, but cultural chameleons, seamlessly integrating into the societies where they set up shop. They spoke multiple languages, adopted local customs, and knew that a friendly smile could be as valuable as the goods in their cargo hold. This cultural fluency enabled them to establish a vast network of trade alliances, turning the Mediterranean into their personal marketplace. Economically, the Phoenicians were the connective tissue of the ancient world, facilitating the flow of goods and ideas across vast distances. Their trade routes linked disparate cultures, spreading technologies, art, and yes, even those luxurious murex-dyed textiles. They wielded soft power before it was a thing, influencing the economy of the entire Mediterranean region without the need for large armies or political dominance. However, let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The Phoenicians were astute business people, and their trade networks were built on exploitation as much as innovation. They were not above sharp practices, and their dealings often involved an intricate dance of diplomacy, deception, and occasional double-dealing. In other words, they were human, driven by the same mix of ambition and necessity that still defines commerce today. So, as we consider the Phoenicians' legacy, it's clear that their story is as much about the hard realities of trade as it is about the legendary exploits of their seafaring ventures. They were the original disruptors, using their unique geographic position and entrepreneurial spirit to become the linchpin of an entire region's economy. And as we continue to unravel their tale, remember that behind every Phoenician ship laden with goods was a story of audacity, ingenuity, and a little bit of luck. So, as we continue to unravel the tale of the Phoenicians, it's clear that their story is about much more than just ships and snails. Behind every vessel laden with goods was a complex web of diplomacy and a high-stakes political dance that would make even the most seasoned diplomats sweat through their toga. Let's dive into the political landscape that both enabled and challenged their trade empire, where the Phoenicians had to dodge threats more deftly than a cat avoiding a bath. First up, let's talk about those fun-loving Assyrians. Picture a powerful empire that was as persistent as a telemark eater during dinner time. The Assyrians, with their vast armies and an appetite for expansion, were the big bad wolf to the Phoenicians' little piggy ports. By the 9th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire had its eyes firmly fixed on the prosperous Phoenician cities, eager to expand its territory and, more importantly, its tax base. For the Phoenicians, this wasn't just a game of Monopoly, it was survival. They had to be as slippery as an eel in a bucket of oil to keep their lucrative trade routes open. Despite the looming threat, the Phoenicians weren't about to let a little thing like an empire get in their way. They played the diplomatic game with a finesse that would make modern politicians take notes. Instead of outright defiance, they opted for a more nuanced approach, paying tributes to the Assyrians to keep them at bay. Think of it as the ancient version of a protection racket, with the Assyrians playing the role of the neighborhood mob boss. These tributes were no small potatoes. They included luxury items, precious metals, and of course, some of that coveted purple dye. The Phoenicians knew that keeping the Assyrians happy was cheaper than funding a war, and significantly less bloody. But the Phoenicians didn't just sit around waiting for empires to knock on their door like unwanted guests. They were proactive, forming alliances and playing rivals against each other like a maestro, conducting an orchestra of geopolitical chaos. Take Egypt, for instance. The Egyptians, with their own empire and a penchant for building oversized stone pyramids, were a key trading partner for the Phoenicians. The relationship was symbiotic. The Phoenicians provided the Egyptians with cedar wood and other exotic goods, while the Egyptians offered protection and access to their vast markets. It was a match made in trade heaven, or at least in the bustling bazaars of Thebes and Memphis. Now, let's not forget the Greeks, those toga-wearing philosophers who also fancied themselves as traders. Phoenician interactions with the Greek city-states were a mix of cooperation and competition, like frenemies at a high-stakes poker game. Both civilizations were keen on expanding their influence across the Mediterranean, and their trade routes often overlapped. Yet, the Phoenicians were smart enough to know that a bit of collaboration could go a long way. They shared knowledge, particularly in navigation and shipbuilding, with the Greeks, probably in exchange for a promise not to stab them in the back during the next trade negotiation. Speaking of backstabbing, the Phoenicians were no strangers to the occasional diplomatic double-cross. Their political maneuvers were as intricate as a Byzantine mosaic, and sometimes alliances needed a little nudge or a strategic betrayal to stay in their favor. The Phoenicians were masters at reading the room, knowing when to switch allegiances faster than you can say, trade embargo. This adaptability allowed them to keep their commercial network thriving, even as the political winds shifted. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was no fairy tale of international cooperation and mutual respect. The Phoenicians had to navigate a minefield of political intrigue where one wrong move could lead to disaster. They were constantly balancing on a tightrope, with hostile powers on one side and potential allies on the other. It was a delicate dance, and the stakes were as high as an elephant on stilts. Yet, despite the challenges, the Phoenicians thrived. Their diplomatic finesse and knack for forming strategic partnerships ensured that their trade empire remained robust, even as empires rose and fell around them. They were the original globalists, understanding that in a world of shifting alliances, the key to success was flexibility, cunning, and a dash of good old-fashioned charm. So, as we continue to sail through this tale of ancient maritime mastery, remember that the Phoenician success story wasn't just about their formidable ships or their knack for turning snails into gold. It was also about their ability to play the game of geopolitical chess, sometimes with a blindfold, and often with a wink and a nod to those in power. Next time, we'll explore even more about their enduring legacy and how these ancient traders managed to leave an indelible mark on history. But for now, let's tip our hats to the Phoenicians, those seafaring diplomats who turned the Mediterranean into their personal boardroom one strategic move at a time. Yet, before we unfurl the sails on the next chapter of Phoenician exploits, let's pause to consider the folklore that enshrouds their legacy. You see, the Phoenicians weren't just merchants. They were the rock stars of ancient trade, leaving behind a trail of myths as colorful as their coveted purple dye. Take, for instance, the tantalizing tale of their alleged circumnavigation of Africa, a feat that, if true, would have been equal parts audacious and downright bonkers given the seafaring technology of the time. Let's set the scene. Around 600 BCE, it's said that Pharaoh Necho Roman II of Egypt commissioned a Phoenician expedition to sail around Africa. This was no weekend yachting trip. It was a maritime odyssey, a journey that would make even the most seasoned sailor clutch their compass with trepidation. According to Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian known for his penchant for embellishment, the Phoenicians set out from the Red Sea, rounded the southern tip of Africa, and returned to the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar. The kicker: they allegedly completed this epic voyage in 3 years, casually stopping along the way to sow and harvest crops for sustenance. Now, let's be real for a moment. The logistics of such a journey are enough to make even modern sailors break out in a cold sweat. The distance from the Red Sea, around the Cape of Good Hope, and back to the Mediterranean is no small feat. It's over 15,000 kilometers, give or take a few detours for sightseeing. And while the Phoenicians were no strangers to long voyages, the notion of them circumnavigating Africa with the ships and navigation tools of the 6th century BCE is, let's say, optimistic at best. So, was it fact or fiction? Scholars remain divided. While Herodotus's account is intriguing, it's sprinkled with enough hyperbole to make one wonder if he was more storyteller than historian. The lack of concrete archaeological evidence to support the claim doesn't help either. Yet, the allure of the story endures, as it captures the spirit of the Phoenicians, bold, adventurous, and always looking to push the boundaries of the known world. But let's not get too carried away with tales of maritime daring-do. The real magic of the Phoenicians lay not just in their ability to sail the Mediterranean like it was their personal racetrack, but in their knack for cultural exchange. You see, the Phoenicians were the ancient world's cultural couriers, spreading ideas, innovations, and most importantly, the Phoenician alphabet wherever they docked. Now, don't roll your eyes just yet. This isn't your average alphabet soup. The Phoenician alphabet was revolutionary, a game-changer in a world where writing was often as cumbersome as deciphering a teenager's text messages. Developed around 1050 BCE, this script was an elegant solution to the cumbersome writing systems of the time. It consisted of 22 characters, all consonants, leaving the vowels to the imagination, kind of like a historical precursor to Twitter's character limit. This alphabet was a hit, spreading like wildfire across the Mediterranean, influencing Greek, Latin, and even Hebrew scripts. Think of it as the ancient world's version of Google Translate, making communication across vast distances possible and facilitating trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. And why did this matter, you ask? Well, in a world where trade wasn't just the exchange of goods, but also of ideas, having a common script was like having a universal language. It allowed for the standardization of contracts, the recording of transactions, and the sharing of knowledge. The Phoenician alphabet was the linchpin of their trading empire, enabling them to communicate effectively with diverse cultures and cementing their status as the merchants of the Mediterranean. But it wasn't just the alphabet that the Phoenicians spread along with their cargo. Their trade routes were conduits of cultural exchange, where art, religion, and technology flowed as freely as the Mediterranean breeze. As they established colonies and trading posts, the Phoenicians brought with them their distinctive art style, characterized by intricate jewelry, glassware, and metalwork. Their artistic influence can be seen in the artifacts unearthed in places as far-flung as Sardinia, Ibiza, and even sub-Saharan Africa, a testament to their far-reaching impact. Moreover, the Phoenicians were instrumental in the dissemination of religious ideas. Their pantheon of gods, including the likes of Astarte and Melkart, found their way into the religious practices of neighboring cultures. These deities were often assimilated into local mythologies, showing yet again the Phoenicians' knack for blending into the cultural tapestry of the regions they traded with. It's like they had an ancient version of cultural diplomacy, where a shared god or two could could ease the path to a lucrative trade agreement. Yet, for all their achievements, the Phoenicians were not without their critics. Their reputation as shrewd traders often earned them suspicion and envy, with some ancient sources portraying them as unscrupulous hucksters, always ready to pull a fast one if it meant turning a profit. But then again, isn't that the hallmark of any successful trader, both ancient and modern? The ability to navigate the fine line between opportunity and exploitation, to capitalize on the gaps in the market, and to adapt to the ever-changing tides of commerce. As we draw nearer to the conclusion of our Phoenician saga, let's not forget that their story is one of both myth and reality, of legendary exploits and mundane transactions. They were the original global entrepreneurs, a civilization that turned its geographical disadvantages into a maritime empire that connected cultures across continents. And while the myths may exaggerate their feats, they also capture the essence of the Phoenicians, their audacity, their adaptability, and their indomitable spirit. So, as we prepare to chart the final course of this historical adventure, let's raise a glass, perhaps a finely crafted Phoenician one, to the merchants of the Mediterranean. Their legacy is a testament to the power of trade, the impact of cultural exchange, and the enduring allure of a good story, even if it involves a bit of embellishment along the way. Stay tuned as we delve into the final chapter of the Phoenicians' tale, where we'll explore how their legacy continues to ripple through history, shaping the world in ways they could never have imagined. As we sail into the final chapters of our Phoenician saga, it's time to face the music. Even the mightiest maritime empire can't keep the winds of change at bay forever. Picture the Mediterranean not as a tranquil sea, but as a bustling freeway, each lane crammed with the ships of competing powers. It's the ancient world's version of rush hour, and the Phoenicians are about to find themselves stuck in traffic. The 8th century BCE was a time of seismic shift, with new players like the Greeks and Romans elbowing their way onto the stage. The Greeks, with their penchant for philosophy and penchant for navigation, started to build their own networks, establishing colonies that mirrored Phoenician outposts. Let's be honest, the Greeks were the new kids on the block, and they were stealing the Phoenician playbook faster than you can say Homer. By 600 BCE, the Greeks had set up shop in places like Cyrene and Massalia, carving out their own slice of the Mediterranean pie. Their secret weapon, an alphabet borrowed from, you guessed it, the Phoenicians. It's like copying your classmates' homework and getting extra credit for it. The Greeks weren't just copying the Phoenicians' business model, they were improving on it, bringing their own flair to trade and navigation. Meanwhile, the Romans, who'd barely gotten their toga hems wet in the Mediterranean, were gearing up for their own imperial ambitions. By 264 BCE, Rome had eyes on Carthage, the Phoenician jewel in North Africa. The Punic Wars ensued, a spectacular series of 3 conflicts that would rival any modern blockbuster trilogy. Spoiler alert, Rome didn't just win, they annihilated Carthage, leaving it in ruins by 146 BCE. For the Phoenicians, this was the equivalent of the corporate raid from hell, and it spelled the end of their dominance. The decline of Phoenician trade routes wasn't just about military might, it was an economic earthquake. As Greek and Roman ships filled the seas, the Phoenicians found themselves outflanked, outmaneuvered, and outtraded. Their once thriving network of colonies and commerce was eclipsed by these rising powers, who brought new goods, new alliances, and crucially, new markets. The Mediterranean, once a Phoenician lake, was now a crowded arena of economic competition. But before you shed a tear for the Phoenicians, let's talk legacy. Because while their trade empire may have crumbled, their influence was anything but ephemeral. Take their maritime technology, for instance. The Phoenicians were the Elon Musks of the ancient world, pushing the boundaries of ship design and navigation. Their biremes and triremes were the sports cars of the sea, built for speed and agility, and their navigational techniques were cutting-edge for the time. They pioneered the use of the North Star for navigation, a trick that sailors would rely on for centuries. And let's not forget their cultural contributions. The Phoenician alphabet, that 22-character marvel, was the Rosetta Stone of the ancient world. It laid the groundwork for modern alphabets, spreading literacy and communication like a viral tweet. Without it, we'd still be chiseling out epic poems on stone tablets, which, let's face it, would take the romance out of any love letter. Economically, the Phoenicians were the connective tissue that held the Mediterranean world together. They didn't just trade goods, They traded ideas, art, and culture. Their influence rippled outwards, shaping the societies they touched. The Greeks and Romans may have eclipsed them, but they inherited a world already knit together by Phoenician ingenuity. So, what does it all mean? Well, the Phoenicians teach us that sometimes the most lasting legacies aren't the ones written in stone, but the ones etched in culture. They were the original global entrepreneurs, proving that a small civilization with a big vision could change the world. Their trade routes may have faded into the annals of history, but the echoes of their achievements resonate even today. In the end, the Phoenicians remind us that the true power of an empire isn't always measured in swords or shields, but in the ideas and innovations it leaves behind. They were the ancient world's ultimate networkers, connecting people across continents and cultures. As we wrap up this maritime odyssey, let's tip our hats to these audacious seafarers, who navigated not just the seas, but the complex currents of human history. Their tale is a testament to the might of the trade ledger, proving that sometimes the pen can indeed be mightier than the sword. In the tumultuous world of 259 BC, where the air was filled with the clang of swords and the whispers of political intrigue, a baby named Ying Zheng was born. But don't be fooled by the innocent cooing. This kid would grow up to be Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, and the stuff of legends. If you think your family gatherings are awkward, try being born in a time when your dad's hobbies included being a hostage in enemy territory. Ying Zheng's dad, Zhuangxiang of Qin, catchy name, right, was living it up as a royal hostage in the state of Zhao. This was the ancient equivalent of a trust-building exercise with actual stakes, like life and death stakes. His dad was essentially a guest who couldn't leave, part of a let's not kill each other yet agreement between warring states. If you're thinking this sounds eerily like a Game of Thrones episode, you're not wrong. Except here, nobody had dragons, just a lot of sharp objects and complex political chess games. Speaking of complex, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the legitimacy of Ying Zheng's birth. Rumor had it that his mom, Lady Zhao, had a rather cozy relationship with a wealthy merchant named Lu Bue before she caught the eye of Zhuangxiang. Lu Bue later became a prime minister, so it seems he knew how to play a long game. Some say Lu Bue may have been Ying Zheng's real father. Ah, ancient paternity scandals, the tabloid fodder of the past. Historians still debate this, but one thing's for sure. The kid had a knack for drama from day one. Growing up in such a tumultuous environment, Ying Zheng learned early that trust was as rare as a day without political backstabbing. He was raised in a world where allegiances shifted faster than the sand dunes of the Gobi Desert. The Warring States period wasn't just a name, it was a lifestyle. 7 states constantly jostled for power like contestants on a never-ending reality show, each one trying to out-scheme the other. And in this chaos, young Ying Zheng was sharpening his wits and biding his time. By the time he was 13, Ying Zheng found himself in the spotlight, not as a child star, but as the King of Qin, a title that came with more pressure than a modern-day CEO during quarterly earnings calls. His dad had kicked the bucket, leaving him a crown and a kingdom in need of some serious TLC. Of course, a 13-year-old running a kingdom is a bit like handing a toddler the keys to a Ferrari. Enter Lu Bue, the former merchant with a knack for power plays, who stepped in as regent, guiding the young king through political minefields. But Ying Zheng wasn't content to be a puppet king. Over the years, he watched, learned, and slowly started pulling the strings himself. He was like a sponge, absorbing the lessons of betrayal, loyalty, and the harsh reality that sometimes you have to break a few eggs, or necks, to make an omelette. His childhood was less about playdates and more about plotting his eventual domination of all China. As Ying Zheng grew, so did his ambitions. He wasn't just eyeing the next kingdom over. He had his sights set on the whole enchilada, unifying China. This wasn't just a pipe dream. It was an obsession. And honestly, who could blame him? The constant wars and fragmented states were like a never-ending group project where no one agrees on anything except that they hate working together. Ying Zheng wanted to be the one who finally turned chaos into order, and he wasn't above using a little, or a lot, of force to get there. You might think a guy with such lofty goals would be all work and no play, but Ying Zheng's court was anything but dull. Lu Bue, ever the opportunist, threw lavish parties that resembled ancient raves, complete with wine, music, and intellectual debates. This wasn't just about having a good time. It was a strategic move to attract the best and brightest minds to Qin's court. After all, a king is only as powerful as his advisors, and Ying Zheng was assembling a dream team that would help him achieve his vision. However, the road to unification was littered with more than just the bones of defeated enemies. Ying Zheng faced constant threats, not just from outside his borders, but from within his own court. Betrayal was practically a national sport, and the young king had to be as cunning as a fox to outmaneuver his rivals. Every trust broken was a lesson learned. Each victory only fueled his determination. While the history books often focus on Ying Zheng's later achievements, it's these early years that set the stage for his legendary rule. His youth was a masterclass in political survival, a high-stakes game where losing wasn't an option. This was a kid who started life under a shadow of doubt and rose to become a ruler whose name would echo through the centuries. And we're just warming up, because once Ying Zheng got a taste of power, he was ready to redefine what it meant to be a ruler in China. But that's a story for another time, when the stakes get even higher and the ambitions even grander. So let's dive back into this roller coaster of royal intrigue, shall we? Ying Zheng, our teenage king, is now in the driver's seat, or at least he's starting to wrestle the wheel from Lu Buwei, his regent with a penchant for power plays. At 13, most kids are figuring out algebra, but Ying Zheng, he was navigating a minefield of political backstabbing, where even a sneeze might be misconstrued as treason. While the official narrative paints Lu Buwei as the wise mentor guiding a young king, reality was a bit more Machiavellian. Lu wasn't just some kindly uncle figure. He was more like a chess grandmaster who'd rigged the board. His regency wasn't about nurturing Ying Zheng's leadership skills. It was about maintaining his own grip on power. But our boy Ying wasn't content being a pawn. Nope, he was learning the game, and he was about to flip the board. By 238 BC, the training wheels came off. Ying Zheng assumed full control at 22, and Lu Buwei found himself sidelined faster than a washed-up reality show contestant. But let's rewind a bit to those teenage years, because that's where the foundation for this power grab was laid. Ying Zheng didn't just sit around waiting for his turn. He was busy consolidating power like it was going out of style. Picture this, a teenage king in a world where alliances were as stable as a sandcastle at high tide. Ying Zheng had to make his move before someone else did. And let's not forget the colorful cast of characters at his court, all vying for influence and control. If you thought high school cliques were brutal, Qin's court was a whole new level of cutthroat. Yet, Ying Zheng played them like a seasoned pro. Take the construction of the Great Wall, for instance. While it's easy to romanticize this as a visionary project, the reality was far more pragmatic and brutal. The wall wasn't just about keeping out pesky northern invaders. It was a way to keep his newly acquired territories in line. Built by hundreds of thousands of laborers, some historians estimate around 300,000. This wasn't a weekend DIY project. It was a grueling endeavor that cost countless lives. Talk about a harsh reality check against those romantic tales of visionary leadership. The Great Wall, stretching over 5,000 miles, wasn't just a wall. It was a statement, a colossal middle finger to anyone daring to challenge his authority. And while it's easy to admire the engineering marvel, it's important to remember the human cost. This was empire building at its rawest, the kind that doesn't make it into the polished pages of history books, but it's the kind that gets the job done. But the Great Wall was just one piece of the puzzle. Back home, Ying Zheng was busy cleaning house. He wasn't above eliminating rivals with the kind of efficiency that would make even the most ruthless corporate CEO blush. If someone posed a threat, they were swiftly and sometimes brutally dealt with. It was survival of the fittest, and Ying Zheng had every intention of being the last man standing. Yet despite the bloodshed and backstabbing, Ying Zheng was no mere tyrant. He was a strategist, willing to do what was necessary to unify China. His ambition was relentless, driven by a vision of a single, powerful state. And while the methods might make our modern sensibilities squirm, they were undeniably effective. He wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rules. Of course, the romantic tales of his leadership often gloss over the less savory aspects. But let's face it, history is never just black and white. It's a tapestry of grays. Ying Zheng understood that to build something truly lasting, sometimes you had to break a few, or a few thousand, eggs. Or in his case, build a wall and eliminate a rival or two. As we continue this journey through his early reign, it's crucial to keep both the legend and the reality in perspective. Ying Zheng was a complex figure, a visionary with a penchant for ruthlessness. His ascent to power was marked by shrewd calculations and a willingness to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. He was a master of political survival, and these teenage years set the stage for his eventual transformation into Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a united China. But hold onto your hats, because the story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of a reign that would reshape the course of Chinese history. There's more intrigue, more power plays, and yes, more walls. Stay tuned as we unravel the next chapter of Ying Zheng's life, where the stakes get even higher and the ambitions even grander. So, just when you thought Ying Zheng, soon to be Qin Shi Huang, couldn't possibly up the ante after building a wall that could double as a marathon track, he decided it was time to tidy up the whole empire like a neat freak with OCD on steroids. We're talking standardization, folks, and no, not just the kind that makes your coffee cup fit perfectly into your car holder. This was a full-blown, empire-wide overhaul of epic proportions. First on the list, currency. Before the Qin dynasty, it was a bit like Monopoly money gone wild. Each state had its own version of cash, which made trade about as confusing as trying to split a dinner bill among 12 friends, each with different currencies. Enter Qin Shi Huang, who said, "Enough of this nonsense," and rolled out the Ban Liang coin, a round copper beauty with a square hole that made it look like a designer button. This wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a power move to unify the economy. Now, everyone from the rice farmer to the silk merchant knew exactly what they were dealing with when they jingled their pockets. But why stop at coins when you can impose order on everything? Next up was weights and measures. Imagine a world where buying a sack of rice could mean anything from a few grains to enough to feed an army, depending on where you were shopping. Qin Shi Huang put an end to that chaos by standardizing measurements, ensuring that a pound was a pound, whether you were in the bustling markets of Xianyang or the sleepy outskirts of the empire. It was like giving the ancient world its first taste of quality control, and it laid the groundwork for a more cohesive economic system. Yet, while these reforms were undoubtedly brilliant for trade and commerce, they also painted Qin Shi Huang as a bit of a control freak. His obsession with uniformity went beyond practicality and slipped into the realm of compulsion. Might have made Marie Kondo proud, but he sure wasn't winning any popularity contests with everyone else. The emperor's penchant for order was as much about control as it was about efficiency, and it was a double-edged sword that cut deep into the social fabric. And speaking of sharp edges, let's talk about the infamous book burnings. If you've ever had a teacher threaten to burn your homework, Qin Shi Huang actually lived that nightmare, sort of. In 213 BC, he ordered the burning of books across the empire, targeting works that contradicted or challenged his regime. The idea was to purge any dissenting philosophies and histories that didn't toe the imperial line. Think of it as history's most aggressive editorial policy, where the penalty for a bad review wasn't just a scathing blog post, but incineration. Of course, this wasn't just about getting rid of pesky critics. It was a strategic move to cement his legacy and control the narrative. Because, let's be honest, history is written by the winners, especially when they own all the pens and paper. By eliminating rival schools of thought, Qin Shi Huang aimed to unify ideology just as he had unified currency and measures. It's the kind of top-down control that would make even the most power-hungry CEO feel a bit queasy. Now, you might be wondering how all this standardization and censorship went down with the populace. Well, it was a mixed bag. On one hand, having a single currency and set measures made life easier for traders and merchants, boosting the economy in ways that would make modern economists swoon. On the other hand, the cultural costs were severe. Imagine a world where the diversity of ideas was suddenly snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. Scholars who didn't conform to the new order found themselves out of a job, or worse. Yet, despite the draconian measures, Qin Shi Huang's reforms set the stage for a more unified China. The economic and social impacts were profound, and they paved the way for a more interconnected society. Trade flourished, and for a time, the empire enjoyed a level of economic prosperity that was unprecedented. It was a testament to the emperor's vision and his relentless pursuit of order, even if it came at the cost of freedom and diversity. As we continue to unravel the complexities of Qin Shi Huang's reign, it's clear that his legacy is as complicated as the man himself. He was a visionary who saw the potential for a unified nation, but he was also a tyrant who wielded power with a heavy hand. His reforms were both revolutionary and repressive, a testament to the dual nature of progress. So, what's the takeaway here? Perhaps it's that history is never simple. It's a tangled web of ambition, power, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Qin Shi Huang's story is a reminder that the path to greatness is often paved with contradictions. And while his methods might make us cringe today, there's no denying the impact he had on shaping the course of Chinese history. But hold on to your scrolls, because the story doesn't end here. We've only scratched the surface of Qin Shi Huang's reign, and there's more intrigue and audacious ambition to uncover. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the life of China's first emperor, where the stakes continue to rise and the legacy becomes even more complex. In the grand tapestry of Qin Shi Huang's reign, perhaps the most audacious thread was his relentless pursuit of immortality, a quest that would make even the most fervent modern-day health guru blush. The man unified China, standardized just about everything but the color of the sky, and built a wall visible from space. Yet, despite all his earthly achievements, he was haunted by a singular existential dread, the inevitability of death. It's a bit like being the wealthiest person alive and still fearing a tax audit. Only in this case, the audit was by the Grim Reaper himself. Enter the emperor's obsession with alchemy. While today's wellness trends involve kale smoothies and yoga retreats, back in 210 BC, seeking eternal life meant downing potions that would make a mad scientist proud. Qin Shi Huang's advisors, eager to please their boss who happened to have quite the temper, concocted elixirs laden with mercury. Yes, mercury, the same stuff that modern science warns against even touching. The emperor, however, chugged these metallic cocktails like they were the fountain of youth. Now, you might be wondering how someone so shrewd could fall for such a dangerous hoax. But remember, we're talking about an era when science was more magic show than method. Alchemy was the ancient world's version of cutting-edge tech, and if you were desperate to cheat death, you'd probably gulp down whatever your court alchemist whipped up too. The irony, of course, is that these so-called life-extending brews were likely hastening his demise. Mercury poisoning has a way of doing that. It's like trying to cure your fear of planes by jumping out of one. Meanwhile, as Qin Shi Huang was busy courting eternal life, he was also making plans for an afterlife that would make even the pharaohs green with envy. This isn't your typical retirement plan. It's more like an elaborate insurance policy against mortality. His tomb, a sprawling subterranean complex located in modern-day Xi'an, was the ancient equivalent of a luxury condo, complete with all the amenities a dead emperor might need. And the piece de resistance, the terracotta army, a veritable legion of clay soldiers, standing at attention to guard him in the hereafter. Constructed over 36 years, this grandiose necropolis was staffed by over 700 laborers, a workforce that could populate a small city. Imagine the logistical headache of organizing such a project without the luxury of spreadsheets or email reminders. Yet Qin Shi Huang's quest for an opulent afterlife was as much about power as it was about paranoia. He wanted to ensure that, should he somehow not achieve immortality, he'd still have an army at his command. It's like preparing for a vacation by packing your entire house, just in case. The terracotta army itself is a marvel of artistry and manpower. Each of the estimated 8,000 soldiers is unique, with distinct facial expressions and armor details, a testament to the obsessive attention to detail that characterized Qin Shi Huang's reign. It's like commissioning an artist to paint your portrait and ending up with a personalized sculpture of every guest at your last party. The absurdity, of course, lies in the contrast. A man so desperate to live forever, yet meticulously preparing for his own death. This duality is the crux of Qin Shi Huang's legacy, a vision of grandeur tempered by the stark reality of human mortality. He was a ruler who conquered nations, yet couldn't conquer his own fears. While the terracotta army stands as an enduring symbol of his might, it's also a poignant reminder of the futility of trying to escape the inevitable. The emperor's tomb remains unopened, shrouded in mystery and sealed with rivers of mercury. Yes, He even had mercury rivers installed. Clearly, he didn't learn from his drinking habits. It's almost poetic that his final resting place is as toxic as the potions he drank in life. Despite the irony, there's a certain allure to Qin Shi Huang's quest for immortality. It speaks to a universal human desire to transcend our limitations, to leave a mark that endures beyond the grave. For all his faults, the Emperor's ambition was boundless, and his story resonates precisely because it mirrors our own fears and aspirations. We may not be building terracotta armies, but the drive to leave a legacy, to be remembered, is as potent today as it was 2 millennia ago. Yet, as we peel back the layers of Qin Shi Huang's reign, it's clear that his pursuit of eternal life was less about living forever and more about control. Control over life, death, and the narrative of his rule. He was a man who sought to bend reality to his will, who saw the world as a canvas upon which he could imprint his vision. And in that quest, he both achieved greatness and succumbed to the very human flaws he sought to overcome. As we continue to explore the life and legacy of Qin Shi Huang, it's essential to keep this duality in mind. His story is a testament to the power of ambition and the limits of human frailty, a reminder that even the most powerful among us are, in the end, only human. So, while we marvel at the terracotta army and ponder the mysteries of his tomb, let's not forget the lessons embedded in his quest for immortality. The Emperor's legacy is not just in what he built, but in the enduring questions he leaves behind. And as we head into the final chapter of Qin Shi Huang's life, prepare for more twists, more ironies, and perhaps a few surprises. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the story is never really over. It's just waiting for the next chapter to unfold. So, stay tuned, because the Emperor's tale is far from finished, and there's more to discover in the fascinating life of China's first emperor. So, as we gear up for the final act of Qin Shi Huang's life, let's start with a plot twist no one saw coming. In 210 BC, the Emperor's quest for eternal life hit an unexpected snag. Turns out, chugging mercury like it's happy hour isn't exactly a recipe for longevity. Who'd have guessed? As he embarked on a tour of his empire, likely to inspect all his glorious achievements, he fell seriously ill. It was as if the universe decided to play the ultimate prank on a man who tried to outmaneuver death itself. Picture this. Qin Shi Huang, the iron-fisted ruler who unified China, now rendered vulnerable by the very potions meant to make him invincible. It's a classic tale of hubris, with the Emperor's health deteriorating faster than you can say lead poisoning. In the end, it wasn't an army of enemies or a palace coup that took him down. No, it was his own overzealous pursuit of immortality that did the job, proving once again that Mother Nature has a wicked sense of humor. His death threw the empire into a tailspin. Imagine a colossal Jenga tower, painstakingly built with standardized blocks of currency, laws, and walls, suddenly missing its critical piece. Without Qin Shi Huang's iron grip, the whole structure wobbled precariously. His younger son, Huang, was thrust onto the throne, thanks to some backdoor scheming by trusted advisor Zhao Gao, a man who redefined the phrase office politics. Zhao Gao, more of a puppet master than a loyal minister, maneuvered Huang into power. But this new emperor was more marionette than monarch, lacking the vision or ruthlessness of his father. The result? Well, let's just say the empire's collapse was faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Huang's reign, marked by indecision and manipulation, was a veritable buffet for opportunistic warlords and rebellious factions. Within just 3 years, the Qin dynasty went from being the undisputed ruler of China to a historical footnote, overthrown by the Chuhan contention, a civil war that would make even the most dramatic soap opera seem tame. But hey, let's not be too hard on Huang. Being compared to Qin Shi Huang is like trying to follow a rock star's act with a kazoo solo. The fact is, inheriting an empire built on fear and control is like being handed a grenade with the pin already pulled. The moment Qin Shi Huang's iron grip loosened, all those suppressed tensions and resentments burst forth like an ancient pressure cooker, finally blowing its lid. Now, as we sift through the rubble of the Qin dynasty, what do we make of Qin Shi Huang's legacy? For starters, he's remembered as a visionary who dared to dream big, really big. We're talking about a man who managed to unify warring states into a single entity, standardize the disparate elements of his empire, and leave behind an architectural marvel that survived millennia. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous details. His reign was equally marked by brutality, oppression, and a disregard for human life that might make even the most hardened despots wince. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition. Sure, Qin Shi Huang achieved extraordinary feats, but at what cost? His empire's collapse was as spectacular as its rise, a testament to the dangers of building a kingdom on fear and control. It's like constructing a skyscraper out of sand, impressive, but not exactly sustainable. And then there are the myths, the tales that paint him as a tyrant and a visionary, a madman and a genius. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a complex figure, a man who could inspire awe and terror in equal measure. While some stories cast him as a villain who burned books and buried scholars alive, others remember him as the architect of a unified China. It's a legacy as multifaceted as the terracotta warriors standing guard over his tomb. So, how does history remember Qin Shi Huang? With a mix of admiration and caution. He was a man of contradictions, embodying both the heights of human ambition and the depths of human folly. His grand visions left an indelible mark on China, but they also serve as a reminder of the limits of power. As much as he tried, he couldn't cheat death, nor could he ensure the longevity of his empire. In the end, Qin Shi Huang's life is a testament to the enduring struggle between order and chaos, ambition and consequence. He was a ruler who sought to leave a legacy that defied time. Yet his story is also a poignant reminder that even the greatest empires are but temporary. As we close the book on his life, we're left with a sense of wonder at the scale of his achievements and a sobering reflection on the cost of his dreams. So, dear listeners, as you drift off to sleep with visions of ancient China dancing in your heads, remember this. History is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, power, and the eternal human desire to be remembered. Qin Shi Huang's tale is one of those threads, a story that continues to captivate and caution us more than 2,000 years later. Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that the past never truly dies. It just waits for the next chapter to unfold. Flax might not scream glamorous, but ancient Egyptians sure knew how to work it like runway models strutting down the Nile. It all started about 5,000 years ago, when they figured out that this unassuming plant could be transformed into linen, a fabric so fine it would make any modern textile enthusiast weep. Now, before you dismiss flax as just another plant, consider this. Without it, all those dazzling white tunics that grace hieroglyphics would be nothing more than figments of an artist's imagination. Let's rewind to the banks of the mighty Nile, the lifeline of Egypt, where the annual flooding deposited nutrient-rich silt, creating a perfect environment for flax cultivation. This wasn't just any geographical quirk. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a high-tech hydroponic system. The Egyptians were pretty savvy about maximizing their resources long before sustainability became a buzzword. The river gave them flax, and they took it everywhere. They were the original proponents of zero waste, using every part of the plant, from seeds to stalks, long before your local coffee shop started composting its coffee grounds. As for tools, these early Egyptians weren't exactly working with laser cutters and 3D printers. They had to make do with rudimentary instruments that would probably make modern crafters cringe. Sharp stones and bone needles were the name of the game. Yet somehow they managed to craft textiles so delicate that they'd give silk a run for its money. It's almost as if they were saying, who needs high tech when you have high skill? And let's not forget the social hierarchy involved. The quality of linen you wore was a status symbol. The finer the weave, the higher your standing. Wearing coarse linen was like showing up to a black tie event in sweatpants. Interestingly, flax didn't just grow by itself. It needed tending, and that meant labor, lots of it. We're talking about a workforce that didn't clock in at 9 and leave at 5. The cultivation of flax was a year-round commitment. After all, this was a society that believed in the afterlife, where even the dead needed a fresh linen wrap to look their best. Forget the idea of wear it once and forget about it. In ancient Egypt, clothes were an investment for eternity. The Egyptians' knack for making the most of their environment extended beyond just harvesting flax. They used the sun to bleach their linen, laying it out across the sands to achieve that pristine white color that would make any laundry detergent marketer envious. And while we're on the topic of color, let's talk about dyes. Natural dyes came from plants, minerals, and even insects. Yes, bugs, because why not? If you're already using every part of a plant, why not extend that philosophy to the animal kingdom? Politically, the production of textiles wasn't just a domestic affair. It was a state-sponsored enterprise. Pharaohs controlled the industry with an iron grip because, let's face it, a well-dressed populace was a happy populace, or at least a less rebellious one. Textiles were more than just fashion statements. They were currency, used in trade to acquire goods from other lands. Linen was, in many ways, a measure of wealth. It was the Bitcoin of its day, volatile in value but deeply desired. In this world of linen, the myth of the golden age of Egyptian fashion thrives, but let's not get too carried away with romantic notions. The reality was much grittier. The workers who toiled to produce these fine fabrics didn't exactly live the high life. Their days were long, their tools primitive, and their rewards minimal. Yet somehow, they managed to create garments that have captivated imaginations for millennia. It's a testament to human ingenuity, and perhaps a little reminder that sometimes simplicity can weave the most complex stories. So the next time you slip into a linen shirt, spare a thought for those ancient Egyptians who blazed the trail, turning flax into linen with the kind of flair that would put modern designers to shame. They laid the foundation for a textile tradition that wasn't just about fashion, but about identity, economy, and survival. And that, my friends, is a legacy that even the trendiest fabrics of today can't unravel. So, let's talk about how the Egyptians took their love affair with linen to the next level. Enter the horizontal ground loom. This wasn't just some casual summer fling. It was a full-blown revolution in textile technology. Imagine a world where weaving wasn't just an art form, but a daily grind, a back-breaking task done by hand until some genius decided it was time for an upgrade. The horizontal ground loom was like the ancient Egyptian answer to an ergonomic office chair. It changed the game by allowing weavers to sit comfortably while working, rather than crouching over in discomfort. Talk about letting your craft sit down and take a load off. This innovation wasn't just about comfort, though it was about efficiency and productivity. With the horizontal ground loom, weavers could produce wider and more consistent pieces of fabric, which meant more linen for everyone, from the lowliest farmer to the pharaoh himself. And this wasn't just a trend among the elite, it was a society-wide shift. The loom made it possible for even small households to produce their own textiles, democratizing fashion in a way that would make any modern fast fashion retailer green with envy. Now, why did this matter so much? Well, let's dig into the socio-economic factors. You see, ancient Egypt was like a finely tuned machine, and textiles were the oil that kept it running smoothly. Linen wasn't just for clothing. It was used for everything from sails to shrouds for mummies. It was a currency of sorts, traded for goods and services, and a key export that helped Egypt maintain its status as a powerhouse of the ancient world. The ground loom, therefore, wasn't just a tool, it was an economic engine. And speaking of engines, let's not forget the workforce. The people operating these looms weren't exactly doing it for the love of the craft. They were doing it to survive. While Hollywood loves to portray ancient Egyptians as living in opulent splendor, the reality was that most of them were working their fingers to the bone just to get by. The myth of the mummy fashionista. You know, the idea that these folks were strutting around in the latest styles like ancient influencers is just that, a myth. In reality, they were more concerned with making sure they had enough to eat than with the latest toga trend. The looms themselves were often communal property, shared among families or even entire villages. This wasn't just about pooling resources, it was about survival. In a land where famine could strike at any moment, having access to a loom meant having the means to trade for food or other necessities. It was a lifeline, not a luxury. And while we're on the subject of survival, let's debunk another romantic notion. The idea that Egyptian fashion was all about looking good in the afterlife. Sure, the wealthy were buried with their finest linens, but this wasn't some ancient form of vanity. It was a practical measure, ensuring that the deceased would be well equipped for the journey to the afterlife. After all, you wouldn't want to show up to eternity in rags, would you? But the truth is, for the average Egyptian, the focus was on the here and now. Dressing the dead in fine linen was as much about honoring their memory as it was about keeping up appearances. Economically, the production of textiles was tightly controlled by the state. The pharaohs knew that in order to maintain power, They needed to keep the textile industry humming. It was a cornerstone of the economy, fueling trade and providing jobs. The state's grip on textile production was as firm as a pharaoh's grip on his crook and flail, the symbols of power and authority. And while the elite might have worn the finest linens, it was the lower classes who made it all possible. These were the folks working the looms, growing the flax, and ultimately keeping the wheels of the economy turning. Politically, textiles were more than just a domestic affair. They were a tool of diplomacy. Fine linen was sent as gifts to foreign dignitaries, a gesture that said, "Look at us. We're rich, we're powerful, and we make the best darn textiles this side of the Mediterranean." It was soft power at its finest, centuries before the term was coined. So next time you think about ancient Egypt, don't just picture pyramids and golden masks. Picture the looms, the flax fields, and the people who worked day in and day out to make it all happen. They might not have been the fashionistas of their time, but they were the backbone of a civilization that still captures our imagination thousands of years later. The story of Egyptian textiles is one of innovation, resilience, and a little bit of style. Just enough to keep the myth alive, but not so much that we forget the gritty reality. And that, my friends, is a narrative that continues to unfold, one thread at a time. Now, speaking of unraveling myths, let's dive into the world of Egyptian textiles and figure out why everyone thinks they were swanning around in golden threaded togas like ancient rock stars. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Sure, the tombs of pharaohs were stocked with linen that might have shamed a modern-day luxury brand, but the average Joe, or I should say, the average Nebipeda, wasn't exactly draped in gilded glory. Let's set the record straight. In ancient Egypt, linen was the fabric of the everyman, but not all linen was created equal. It was as varied in quality as your neighborhood coffee shop's menu. The elite strutted in fine threaded linen, the kind where you could count up to 500 threads per inch. This was the ancient equivalent of wearing haute couture. Meanwhile, the everyday folks made do with coarser threads, the ancient version of off-the-rack from your local department store. But why the obsession with linen, you ask? Well, in a land where summer felt like an eternal desert rave, linen's breathability was a game changer. It was light, airy, and surprisingly durable. Plus, it didn't hurt that it was locally sourced. Egyptians were all about that homegrown lifestyle long before it was trendy. And if you were feeling adventurous, there was always the option to dye your linen using natural pigments. Though, let's be honest, the idea of wearing a Beatles color palette might not have been everyone's cup of tea. Now, while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the misconception of Egyptian fashion being a one-size-fits-all scenario. In reality, clothing was as much about personal expression as it was about practicality. The wealthy flaunted their status with pleated kilts and elaborately draped dresses, often accessorized with jewelry that would make any Instagram influencer green with envy. Meanwhile, the working classes wore simple tunics that had to withstand the rigors of daily life. These weren't just clothes, they were armor against the elements. And speaking of elements, let's not forget the religious and burial significance of textiles. In Egypt, death was just the beginning of an eternal journey, and no one wanted to start that journey in shabby threads. The dead were wrapped in linen shrouds, a practice that was less about fashion and more about function. Linen was believed to have protective and purifying qualities necessary for the afterlife. The Book of the Dead even describes specific linen rituals, because even in the great beyond, Egyptians preferred to have things neatly tied up. The burial shrouds were often embroidered with spells and symbols, a kind of spiritual insurance policy. And while we imagine these wrappings as opulent, the reality was different for the common folk. Their shrouds were practical, reflecting their earthly status. Meanwhile, pharaohs and the elite were entombed with enough linen to stock a small boutique, because if you're going to sail through eternity, you might as well do it in style. But what did all this mean for the economy? Well, textiles were a cornerstone of the Egyptian economy, a fact that's often glossed over in favor of talk about pyramids and gold. Linen wasn't just a commodity, it was a currency. It was used to pay workers, trade with neighboring regions, and even as an offering to deities. This fabric was woven into the very fabric, pun intended, of Egyptian life. And let's not forget the workforce that made all of this possible. The laborers who tilled the flax fields and worked the looms were the unsung heroes of this textile tale. These were not glamorous jobs. They were grueling, often carried out under the relentless Egyptian sun. Yet they were vital to the economy and society. Without them, the wheels of Egyptian civilization might have ground to a halt. This brings us to another point, the political power of textiles. Pharaohs knew that control over textile production was control over the economy. They maintained strict oversight, ensuring that the finest linens were reserved for the elite and religious ceremonies. It was a way to reinforce social hierarchies and maintain stability. After all, a well-dressed population is more likely to toe the line. And while we're talking politics, textiles also played a role in diplomacy. High-quality Egyptian linen was prized across the ancient world, a soft power tool that opened doors and sealed alliances. Sending a gift of fine linen was akin to sending a message. Egypt was not only rich in resources, but also in culture and craftsmanship. So there you have it. Egyptian textiles were more than just threads and fabric. They were a complex web of social, economic, and political significance. They tell a story of a civilization that understood the power of both style and substance, a civilization that wove its identity into every piece of linen it produced. And as we move forward, remember this. The next time you slip on a linen garment, think of the ancient Egyptians who spun their society from flax, crafting a legacy that endures to this day. From the sweat of the fields to the grandeur of the tombs, each thread tells a tale of human ingenuity and resilience. And that's a story worth wrapping your mind around. And speaking of stories woven into fabric, let's talk trade. Because Egyptian textiles weren't just a local affair. They were the ancient world's version of a global sensation. Picture this. Egyptian linen was the haute couture of the ancient Mediterranean, and everyone wanted a piece of it. The trade routes were practically fashion runways, with linen strutting its stuff from the Nile Delta all the way to the bustling markets of the Levant, and further to the shores of the Aegean Sea. If linen could have walked, it would have done so with swagger. But let's not get caught up in the romance of it all. Behind this glamorous export was a massive, complex network that made modern supply chains look like child's play. It was an intricate dance of logistics, economics, and yes, a little bit of diplomacy. Egypt's trade routes were arteries that pumped life into the economy, and linen was the lifeblood coursing through them. We're talking about a fabric that traveled hundreds, even thousands of miles to reach its eager consumers. And why was this linen so coveted? Well, for starters, it was like the silk of its time, light, breathable, and versatile. But more importantly, it was a symbol of luxury and status, a tangible link to the exotic allure of Egypt. Imagine being a well-to-do Phoenician merchant or a Minnow noble draped in the finest Egyptian linen. It was like wearing a badge that screamed, "I've made it." And let's face it, nothing says, "I'm living my best life," quite like imported luxury goods. However, the trade wasn't just about satisfying the whims of fashion-conscious elites. It played a critical role in Egypt's economy. Linen exports were a significant source of revenue, and they helped secure essential goods that Egypt couldn't produce itself. We're talking about cedar wood from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, and wine from Greece. The Egyptians were master traders, swapping their textiles for resources that fueled everything from monumental architecture to military campaigns. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. The romantic image of Egyptian merchants leisurely sailing down the Nile with the wind in their sails is charming, but the reality was far grittier. Trade involved perilous journeys fraught with dangers, both natural and human. Merchants had to navigate treacherous waters, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present threat of piracy. It was less smooth sailing and more brace for impact. Yet, the rewards outweighed the risks, and so the trade caravans kept moving, driven by the promise of profit and prestige. Archaeological finds give us a glimpse into this bustling trade network. For instance, the Uluburun shipwreck, discovered off the coast of Turkey, contained Egyptian artifacts, including a gold scarab bearing the name of Nefertiti. This wreck, dating back to the 14th century BCE, is a testament to the extensive reach of Egyptian trade. It's like finding an ancient cargo manifest that tells us who was trading what and with whom. These artifacts reveal not just the range of goods exchanged, but also the cultural and political links fostered through trade. Economically, the impact of textile trade was immense. It was a significant driver of wealth and power, not just for the state, but for private merchants who capitalized on this lucrative market. Trade agreements and partnerships were often sealed with exchanges of linen and other luxury goods, reinforcing alliances and ensuring the flow of resources. This was diplomacy in its most tangible form, a blend of soft power and shrewd negotiation. But let's not forget the human cost. The demand for linen meant that the laborers back in Egypt were under constant pressure to produce. These were the folks who lived the harsh realities of the industry, working tirelessly to meet quotas and deadlines. While pharaohs and merchants reaped the profits, the workers saw little of this wealth. It was a tale as old as time, the few benefiting from the toil of the many. In terms of societal impact, the textile trade helped reinforce Egypt's position as a cultural and economic powerhouse. It elevated Egypt from a regional power to a key player on the international stage. Linen wasn't just a commodity. It was a tool of influence, shaping perceptions and fostering cultural exchanges. The stories of Egyptian linen traveling across seas and deserts speak to a civilization that understood the power of trade long before globalization became a buzzword. So, there you have it. Egyptian textiles were more than just fabric. They were the threads that wove together economies, cultures, and histories. They tell a story of ambition, ingenuity, and a little bit of showmanship. As we unravel the next chapter, keep in mind that this isn't just a tale of ancient fashion. It's a saga of human endeavor and enterprise, one that echoes across the millennia. And who knows, maybe that linen shirt you're wearing today has more in common with ancient Egypt than you ever imagined. Now, let's stitch together the final threads of this tapestry we've been weaving about the ancient Egyptian textile industry. We've journeyed through flax fields, marveled at the ingenuity of horizontal looms, and sailed alongside linen-laden trade caravans. But what's really fascinating is how these ancient practices have cast a long shadow over the looms of history, influencing cultures and textile techniques far beyond the banks of the Nile. Fast forward to the Roman era, and you'll see Egyptian linen making quite the splash. The Romans, never ones to shy away from luxury, adopted the use of linen for everything from togas to household linens. They loved it so much that they even imported skilled Egyptian weavers to ensure they got the real deal. The Egyptians had become the Gucci of the ancient world, their products as coveted as fine wine or Mediterranean olive oil. It was a testament to their craftsmanship and the enduring quality of their textiles. And let's not ignore the irony here. While the Romans were busy conquering lands, they were also importing culture, one linen thread at a time. But the influence didn't stop there. As history marched on, medieval Europe saw a resurgence in linen production, with Egyptian techniques forming the backbone of this craft. The city of Fustat in Egypt became a renowned center for textile production, giving us the word fustian for a heavy cloth that's still in use today. It's a bit of a historical plot twist, isn't it? The same fabric that wrapped pharaohs was now clothing European peasants and nobility alike. It's like discovering that your favorite artisanal brand has been around since the dawn of time. Now, speaking of discoveries, let's not overlook the archaeological treasures that have unearthed millennia-old textiles in astonishing condition. The dry Egyptian climate has preserved linen garments that are not just relics, but time capsules. Some of these finds are so finely woven that they'd put modern fabrics to shame. It's a bit like finding out your grandmother's vintage wardrobe is more chic than your entire closet. These artifacts give us a tangible connection to the past, showing that the Egyptians weren't just fashion-forward, they were downright timeless. And what about the myths we've been unraveling? The romantic notion of golden-threaded togas is a hard one to shake, but let's be honest, the reality was far more nuanced. Most Egyptians weren't lounging in silk-lined palaces. They were in the fields, toiling to keep the fabric of society, quite literally, in one piece. Yet there lies the beauty of the myth. It's the allure of imagining a civilization where everyone was draped in opulence, even if the truth was a bit rough around the edges. The legacy of Egyptian textiles isn't just about the fabric itself, but also about the societal structures it supported. Textiles were a cornerstone of the economy, a political tool, and a social equalizer in a world that was anything but equal. They offered a glimpse into a civilization that understood the power of both form and function, a society that managed to weave together the practical with the profound. The Egyptians turned flax into linen with a flair that not only clothed a nation, but also clothed a legacy. Looking at contemporary practices, the echoes of Egyptian textiles are still with us. In today's world, where fast fashion reigns and textile sustainability is a hot topic, the Egyptians offer a lesson in resourcefulness. They were masters of a zero-waste philosophy long before it was trendy, using every part of the flax plant and leaving little to waste. It's a reminder that ancient wisdom often holds answers to modern dilemmas. But let's not sugarcoat it. The gritty reality of their textile industry was far from idyllic. The laborers who worked the looms and cultivated the flax didn't do so for the love of art. They did it to survive, often under harsh conditions that would make today's factory floors seem like garden parties. This duality, the myth and the reality, paints a picture of a civilization that was as complex as it was captivating. In wrapping up, let's give a nod to the human spirit that drove this ancient industry. The Egyptians were visionaries, not just in building pyramids or crafting intricate hieroglyphs, but in creating textiles that would outlast empires. Their legacy is woven into the very fabric of history, a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of craft. So the next time you slip on a linen shirt or admire a fine piece of fabric, remember that you're wearing a piece of history, a legacy that's as much about the people who toiled under the sun as it is about the pharaohs who wore the finest linens. And there we have it, a story spun from flax and fantasy, grounded in the reality of human endeavor. Egyptian textiles were more than just the clothes on the backs of a civilization. They were the threads that connected economy, culture, and identity. They remind us that sometimes the most remarkable legacies are woven not from gold or silver, but from the humble threads of everyday life. And that's a wrap, folks. Or should I say, that's a shroud. There was once a tiny village in Lincolnshire where the wind howled a little too enthusiastically and the skies seemed to brood perpetually. This was Woolsthorpe, a place most people might pass through without a second glance, except, of course, for the fact that it birthed a scientific giant. Enter Isaac Newton, born on Christmas Day in 1642, who would eventually put this sleepy locale on the map. Now, let's be real. If someone told you a small-town kid with a knack for tinkering and precisely zero social skills would one day redefine physics, you'd probably chuckle. But here we are. Newton's beginnings were as humble as they come. He was born prematurely, so much so that his mother reportedly said he could fit inside a quart mug. Whether or not that's true, it paints a vivid picture of his unlikely origins. His father, also named Isaac, had passed away 3 months before his birth, and his mother, Hannah Iskoff, remarried when he was just 3, leaving young Isaac in the care of his grandmother. Talk about a rough start. But maybe it was this lonely upbringing that fueled his curiosity and drive. Let's talk about the social scene, or lack thereof. In an era when social skills were as valued as a good loaf of bread, Newton was more of a stale crust. He was the kid who'd rather watch ants at work than join a game of tag. But don't let his introversion fool you. While his peers were probably busy playing with rocks, or whatever passed for toys in the 17th century, Newton was busy conducting experiments that would make most adults scratch their heads. Case in point, the miniature windmill. Inspired by the real windmills dotting the Lincolnshire landscape, young Newton built a tiny version that could grind wheat. Because, you know, what child doesn't dream of efficient grain processing? This knack for invention wasn't just child's play. It was a glimpse of the methodical genius that would later revolutionize science. His early fascination with mechanical devices laid the groundwork for his analytical mind. While his contemporaries might have been content with the simple wonders of a windmill, Newton's mind was already spinning with questions about how the world worked. And let's not forget the water clock he constructed, a timepiece powered by the flow of water, demonstrating his early grasp of mechanics and time. Move over, Apple Watch. The economic conditions of 17th century England were a mixed bag, to say the least. It was a time of great upheaval, with the English Civil War brewing in Newton's early years, eventually leading to the execution of King Charles I in 1649. This period was as politically unstable as a three-legged chair. The war brought economic hardship, and the rural areas like Lincolnshire weren't spared. Agriculture was the lifeblood of the region, and people had to be resourceful to get by. Newton's family, like many others, was deeply rooted in the farming tradition. But unlike his peers, Newton's interests lay far from the fields. Despite the economic turbulence, Newton's family wasn't destitute. They were yeoman farmers, a notch above the common folk, but not quite the landed gentry. This meant that while young Isaac didn't live in opulence, he wasn't exactly scraping for survival either. This modest economic status was probably just enough to fuel his studies without the distraction of financial despair. Lucky for us, because a starving Newton might have traded his genius for a warm meal instead of contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Schooling for Newton was a bit of a mixed experience. He attended the King's School in Grantham, about 20 miles from Woolsthorpe. The commute today might be a quick car ride, but back in the day, that was a serious trek. While he was initially more interested in creating sundials and studying the mechanics of clocks than academic rigor, he soon found his stride. He lodged with a local apothecary, which gave him access to a world of chemical curiosities and medical texts. Talk about an unconventional education. Newton's social skills in school were, let's say, lacking. He wasn't exactly the life of the party, more like the guy in the corner, observing molecules while everyone else danced. But his solitary nature was his strength. While others were busy with typical teenage antics, Newton was busy calculating the motion of the planets. When his mother pulled him out of school to manage the family farm, his lack of enthusiasm was about as subtle as a cannonball. Farming was not his forte. He preferred to lose himself in books rather than mucking out stables. The social and economic landscape of 17th century England was a complex tapestry of opportunity and peril. The country was on the cusp of the Enlightenment, a period characterized by dramatic advances in science, philosophy, and human understanding. Yet, it was also a time of superstition and stagnation for many. Religious and political tensions simmered beneath the surface, impacting daily life in ways we might find hard to fathom. The plague, that ever-present spectre, would make its grand return in 1665, causing chaos and panic across the nation. This was the world Newton was born into, a world ripe for change, but still deeply rooted in tradition. The harsh realities of life in 17th century England, from the brutal English winters to the ever-looming threat of disease, shaped his formative years. But while many found these conditions limiting, Newton saw them as challenges to be overcome. His early experiments and inventions were more than childish amusements. They were a testament to his insatiable curiosity and determination to understand the world. In this tumultuous backdrop, Newton's scientific journey was anything but preordained. He was a product of his time, yet he transcended it. His story is far from the idyllic tale of a solitary genius sitting under an apple tree. It's a story of resilience, of a curious mind nurtured by the challenges and contradictions of his era. As we delve deeper into his life and work, remember, the path to greatness often begins in the most unlikely of places. And for Newton, that place was a modest village in Lincolnshire, where the winds of change were just beginning to stir. But Newton's journey didn't end in Lincolnshire's windswept fields. Oh no, the young inventor had bigger fish to fry, or maybe equations to solve. Fast forward to 1661, when Newton packed his bags and headed to Cambridge University. Now, if you're picturing ivy-covered walls and erudite discussions over cups of tea, think again. Cambridge in the 17th century was less Hogwarts and more. Well, let's just say the hygiene standards left a lot to be desired. Newton enrolled at Trinity College as a sizar, a fancy term for students who work their way through college by doing menial tasks. Think of it as the original work-study program, but with more chamber parts. Despite this less-than-glamorous start, he quickly immersed himself in the academic life. Or rather, the academic life immersed itself in him, like a particularly persistent cat. Newton wasn't exactly a hit at social gatherings, but give him a math problem, and he was all in. His time at Cambridge was a mix of brilliance and struggle. Newton wasn't immediately the golden child of academia. In fact, his early years were marked by a fair amount of academic turbulence. He grappled with the curriculum, which was still heavily rooted in Aristotelian philosophy. Spoiler alert, Newton wasn't a fan. Instead, he spent his time devouring the works of more modern thinkers like Descartes, Galileo, and Kepler. These weren't on the official reading list, but Newton wasn't one to follow the crowd. Instead of writing essays, he preferred scribbling away in his notebooks, which were filled with ideas that would eventually make Aristotle spin in his grave. One of the many legends surrounding Newton is that he invented calculus while at Cambridge. And while that might sound like the kind of thing you'd brag about on a first date, the truth is a bit more nuanced. Newton did indeed develop the foundations of calculus, what he called the method of fluxions, but it wasn't recognized as such until much later. In fact, the term calculus wouldn't even pop up until Leibniz got in on the action. Cue the academic rivalry of the century, but let's not jump ahead. Now, Newton's approach to science was, how shall we put it, a tad unorthodox. While most of us would consider setting our hand on fire a regrettable accident, for Newton it was just another day at the lab. He believed that the best way to understand light and color was to experience it firsthand, literally. In one particularly daring experiment, he poked a bodkin, a sharp, needle-like instrument, into his eye socket to study how pressure affected vision. Friends, this is what you call dedication, or madness. It's a fine line, really. Despite his eccentric methods, Newton's discoveries during his Cambridge years were nothing short of revolutionary. He began formulating his theories on optics, which would later become foundational work in the field. He constructed a reflecting telescope in 1668, the first of its kind, which used mirrors instead of lenses to magnify images. This was because he figured out that lenses distorted colors, a revelation that must have made him feel like the Einstein of his day. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from astronomers everywhere. But it wasn't all breakthroughs and eureka moments. Newton's time at Cambridge coincided with the Great Plague of 1665-1666. The university shut its doors, and students were sent packing. For many, this was a disaster. For Newton, it was an opportunity. He returned to Woolsthorpe for what became one of the most productive periods of his life, famously known as his Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Wonders. While the rest of England was in chaos, Newton was busy discovering the laws of motion and universal gravitation. Talk about making the most of a quarantine. It's tempting to romanticize Newton as the solitary genius, scribbling away under an apple tree. But the reality is far more gritty. His breakthroughs were born out of a mix of isolation, relentless curiosity, and a willingness to question everything, and occasionally set himself on fire. Newton's story at Cambridge is a testament to the fact that genius doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as a young man with ink-stained fingers and more questions than answers. As the Great Plague subsided and Cambridge reopened, Newton returned to a world that was, quite literally, in his rearview mirror. By the time he graduated in 1665, he was no longer the struggling student, but a burgeoning scientist on the cusp of greatness. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Newton's journey was far from over, and his Cambridge years were just the prologue to a story that would change the course of science forever. So buckle up, because the apple hasn't even fallen yet. Newton's story was far from over, and just when you think he's content with revolutionizing science, he decides to tackle England's economic woes. Picture this. It's 1696, and Newton, now in his 50s, trades in his lab coat for a role at the Royal Mint. Yes, the very institution responsible for making sure the coins jangling in your pocket aren't made of chocolate foil. It's a career pivot that would make even the most seasoned LinkedIn user do a double take. So why the sudden change? Well, the economic situation in England at the time was about as stable as a rickety old cart on a cobblestone street. The problem? The currency was in shambles, plagued by rampant counterfeiting and coin clipping. Counterfeiters were having a field day, and clipped coins, where precious metal was literally snipped off the edges, were as common as Newton's bad hair days. The silver coins, in particular, were being shaved thinner than a hipster's mustache, which made trade a nightmare. Enter Newton, the man with a penchant for solving the unsolvable. He was appointed warden of the Royal Mint, a position that sounds cushy but was anything but. With his new role, Newton was expected to turn the tide against counterfeiters and restore faith in the English currency. But let's be clear, this wasn't just a desk job. Newton wasn't content to sit back and let others do the dirty work. Oh no, he was out there, sleeves rolled up, ready to tackle the criminal underworld head-on. Now, the Royal Mint was located in the Tower of London, a place more known for its ravens and beheadings than its monetary policy. But Newton saw it as the perfect base for his operations. He approached the problem of counterfeiting with the same meticulousness he applied to his scientific research. Using his analytical mind, he he set about gathering evidence against the counterfeiters. Imagine Sherlock Holmes with a powdered wig, and you're halfway there. One of Newton's most notorious adversaries was a man named William Challoner. Challoner was a master forger, a real-life Moriarty, if you will, who had been counterfeiting currency and selling fake lottery tickets like they were going out of style. The man had audacity in spades, once even petitioning the government to make him the overseer of the mint, essentially asking them to put the fox in charge of the henhouse. Newton, however, was not one to be easily deceived. He gathered evidence like a modern-day detective, interviewing informants, collecting witness testimonies, and even going undercover to infiltrate Challoner's network. It was like an episode of CSI, London, but with a lot more horse manure and a lot fewer sunglasses. Challoner, perhaps thinking himself untouchable, continued his illicit activities until Newton's meticulous investigation finally brought him to justice. In 1699, Challoner was tried and convicted, largely thanks to Newton's dogged pursuit of the truth. He was hanged at Tyburn, a grim reminder that in the game of thrones, or coins in this case, you either win or you swing. Newton's work at the mint didn't just stop at catching criminals, though. He also implemented sweeping reforms to stabilize the currency. Under his direction, the Great Recoinage of 1696 saw the replacement of all silver coins in circulation, a mammoth task that involved melting down and restriking millions of coins. The result, a more reliable and trustworthy currency that helped stabilize the English economy. Newton's reforms were a smashing success, and his efforts didn't go unnoticed. In 1700, he was promoted to Master of the Mint, a role he held until his death in 1727. It's worth noting that the position came with a hefty salary of around £2,000 a year, equivalent to a tidy £300,000 today. Not too shabby for a man who once lived on a student's budget. But Newton's time at the Mint wasn't just about stopping thieves and stabilizing currency. It marked a shift from the theoretical to the practical, from the ivory tower of academia to the gritty realities of politics and economics. He applied his scientific method to real-world problems, demonstrating that the mind that could unravel the mysteries of the cosmos could also tackle the complexities of human greed and economic instability. His tenure at the Mint also highlights a lesser-known side of Newton, a man unafraid to get his hands dirty, to delve into the murky world of politics and crime. While he may be remembered as the father of modern physics, his work at the Mint showed that his genius extended far beyond the realm of pure science. It's a testament to his versatility and determination, traits that propelled him from the sleepy fields of Lincolnshire to the heart of England's economic machinery. What's remarkable is that Newton didn't see this as a departure from his scientific endeavors, but rather an extension of them. For him, understanding the laws of nature was intrinsically linked to understanding the laws of man. It was all about the pursuit of truth, whether it was the trajectory of a comet or the path of a counterfeit coin. Newton's story at the Mint is a reminder that genius doesn't just reside in the realm of ideas, but also in the application of those ideas to better the world. As we continue to explore Newton's life, it's clear that his impact was as multifaceted as it was profound. From the halls of Cambridge to the corridors of the Royal Mint, he left an indelible mark on every field he touched. And while his time at the Mint may not be as celebrated as his scientific achievements, it's no less significant. It's a chapter in his life that underscores the power of a curious mind, unbound by convention and driven by a relentless quest for understanding. But don't hang up your powdered wig just yet. There's more to this story, and Newton's adventures are far from over. And just when you think Isaac Newton had run out of tricks, he steps into a new role that would redefine him yet again. In 1703, he became president of the Royal Society, the premier scientific body of the time. Imagine a room full of powdered wigs debating the latest in science. Newton was now the head honcho. But let's not get too cozy with this idyllic image of genteel scientific debate. Newton's presidency was more of a scientific battleground, with Newton himself often in the thick of it. Remember Robert Hooke? If Hooke were alive today, he'd be the guy subtweeting Newton every chance he got. Their relationship was a mix of admiration and rivalry, a kind of 17th century frenemy situation. Hooke, a brilliant scientist in his own right, had his fingers in many pies. Microscopy, elasticity, you name it. But it was his work on gravitation that put him on a collision course with Newton. Hooke claimed he had the idea before Newton, but Newton wasn't about to share the limelight. This wasn't just a spat. It was more of an intellectual wrestling match, where egos clashed as much as ideas. Their feud reached its peak when Hooke accused Newton of plagiarizing his work on gravity. Newton, not one to back down, responded with the academic equivalent of a mic drop by publishing Principia Mathematica in 1687, where he laid out his laws of motion and universal gravitation. Hooke was furious, but Newton's calculations were airtight. And while Hooke might have had a point about first dibs on the idea, it was Newton who did the heavy lifting. When Hooke died in 1703, Newton wasted no time in erasing Hooke's legacy from the Royal Society, literally. He removed Hooke's portrait from the Society's gallery, ensuring that he wouldn't have to look at his rival's face, even in oil paint. It wasn't just Hooke who found themselves at odds with Newton. He had a knack for turning scientific debates into personal vendettas. If you didn't agree with him, you were either misguided or an enemy. And let's be honest, Newton wasn't the cuddliest figure in the scientific community. He was more like a porcupine, prickly and unapproachable, but undeniably brilliant. Now, about that infamous apple. The story goes that Newton was sitting under a tree when an apple fell on his head, sparking his theory of gravity. It's a charming tale, but let's be real. It's about as factual as a children's bedtime story. In truth, Newton himself mentioned the apple incident only briefly, not as a eureka moment, but more as an anecdote about the train of thought that led to his theory. It's likely that the apple story was embellished over time by biographers looking for a juicy narrative, because who doesn't love a good fruit-based epiphany? Newton's later years also saw him delve into the more esoteric realms of alchemy and biblical prophecy. While today, we might dismiss these pursuits as the hobbies of a man with too much time on his hands. Back then, alchemy was considered a legitimate field of study. Newton's alchemical work was shrouded in secrecy. He wrote extensively on the subject, using cryptic codes and obscure symbols to record his findings. He was searching for the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance that could turn base metals into gold and grant eternal life. Spoiler alert, he didn't find it, but his experiments with mercury did leave him with a nasty case of mercury poisoning, which might explain some of his later eccentricities. As for biblical prophecy, Newton spent years trying to decode the Bible, convinced it held secret messages about the end of the world. He calculated that the apocalypse would occur no sooner than 2060. So, if you're worried about the state of the world, just remember, Newton's got us covered for a few more decades. His obsession with prophecy seems at odds with his scientific rigor, but it's a reminder that even the most rational minds can be captivated by the mysteries of the divine. By the time he reached his 70s, Newton had become something of a recluse. He still attended meetings and dabbled in scientific debates, but his heart was no longer in it. He preferred the solitude of his studies to the hustle and bustle of the Royal Society. He was still a formidable presence, but the world was changing, and Newton was content to watch from the sidelines. He passed away in 1727, leaving behind a legacy that would shape the course of science for centuries. Newton's later years were a patchwork of brilliance, eccentricity, and human frailty. He was a man of contradictions, a scientific titan who believed in alchemy, a reclusive genius who led the foremost scientific institution of his time. His story reminds us that even the greatest minds are not immune to the quirks and follies of the human condition. And while the apple may not have fallen as advertised, Newton's insights into the universe continue to inspire, challenging us to look beyond the surface and question the world around us. As we wrap up this part of Newton's saga, remember that his genius was as multifaceted as it was profound. From the halls of academia to the corridors of power, he left his mark on every field he touched. But there's still more to explore in the life of this remarkable figure, so stay tuned as we delve deeper into the legacy of Isaac Newton. Newton's legacy, like one of those massive English oak trees, casts a long shadow that's hard to escape. You might not realize it, but Newton's fingerprints are all over modern science and culture, from the tech in your pocket to the pop culture references you chuckle at. Let's face it, any guy who can be credited with laying the groundwork for classical mechanics, optics, and calculus deserves a place in the scientific hall of fame, even if he did spend a little too much time chasing philosophers' stones. First off, let's talk about those famous laws of motion. Newton's 3 laws are essentially the life hacks of physics. They've been guiding everything from space missions to the swing of a playground swing set since they first appeared in the Principia Mathematica in 1687. Remember, this was a time when even the most brilliant minds believed in a geocentric universe. But here comes Newton, crashing the party with his heliocentric reality check, proving that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, just another rock in space, albeit a pretty important one for us. Now, Newton didn't just revolutionize physics, he turned it into a language of its own. His introduction of calculus was like providing scientists with a Rosetta Stone for the universe. Suddenly, the secrets of motion, light, and gravity could be expressed mathematically. Though, to be fair, if Newton had a Facebook relationship status with calculus, it would read, "It's complicated." The whole Newton-Leibniz calculus controversy was like a 17th century academic soap opera, with accusations of plagiarism flying as fast as Newton's theoretical cannonballs. Then there's optics. Newton's work with prisms showed that white light was actually a spectrum of colors, something you probably take for granted every time you glance at a rainbow or marvel at a Pink Floyd album cover. His book Optics, published in 1704, brought light, pun intended, to how colors worked, laying the groundwork for everything from your LED TV to the latest Instar filter. And while we're on the topic of light, how about that reflecting telescope he invented back in 1668? Newton's design allowed astronomers to see further and clearer than ever before. Imagine the thrill of peering through a telescope and realizing that the dance of celestial bodies was governed by the same laws that made apples fall from trees. Underneath, the sky's chaotic beauty lay an elegant order, one that Newton had decoded with an alchemist's determination and a mathematician's precision. Speaking of alchemy, let's not gloss over Newton's more eccentric pursuits. Sure, he spent decades trying to turn lead into gold, but the irony here is golden. While Newton never struck it rich with his alchemical experiments, his scientific achievements were priceless. It's a testament to the multifaceted nature of genius that the same mind that gave us the laws of motion also chased the elusive dreams of alchemy. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant thinkers can also be dreamers, chasing mysteries of a different kind. From the lab to the living room, Newton's influence seeps into our everyday lives. His principles guide the way engineers design everything from roller coasters to rockets. Every time you fly on a plane, thank Newton's laws for keeping you airborne. When you drop your phone, cursing gravity, you're having a Newtonian moment, albeit one that might cost you the price of a new screen. His work laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution, setting the stage for the technological marvels we often take for granted. In culture, Newton's name is practically synonymous with genius. He's the yardstick by which all other scientists are measured. You'll find his likeness in museums, his quotes in textbooks, and his life story retold in countless documentaries. Even the apple, whether it fell or not, has become shorthand for inspiration and discovery. Newton's image has been co-opted and romanticized, but beneath the myth lies a man as complex as his equations. Let's not forget the human side of Newton, the socially awkward genius whose ideas outpaced his social skills. He was an introvert in an extrovert's world, a man more at home with equations than people. Yet it was this very isolation that fueled his creativity. In a world of constant distraction, Newton's ability to focus solely on his work was his superpower. While others mingled and networked, he pondered the universe in solitude, and thank goodness he did. So, what's the takeaway from Newton's life? It's that the path to understanding the universe is paved with curiosity and a fair bit of grit. Newton's legacy isn't just in his discoveries, but in his relentless pursuit of knowledge. He didn't have all the answers, but he wasn't afraid to ask the big questions. And while he may have failed to turn lead into gold, he transformed the world of science in ways that are truly golden. As we wrap up our journey through Newton's storied life, remember that his impact extends far beyond the confines of physics. He was a man who dared to dream, to question, and to explore. His legacy is a reminder that science is not just about facts and figures, but about the courage to seek the truth, no matter how elusive it may be. Next time you see an apple or gaze at the stars, spare a thought for Sir Isaac Newton, the man who helped us see the universe with fresh eyes and a curious mind. As the first rays of the sun sneak over the horizon, you find yourself in 11th century England, a land still trembling under the newly minted rule of William the Conqueror. The air is crisp, and the landscape is a patchwork of fields and forests, but there's a hum in the air that signals change. England is under new management, and William has a kingdom to run and a lot of bills to pay. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, money. William didn't just come across the channel for the fun of it. The Norman conquest wasn't a cheap venture, and maintaining control over a newly conquered land required more than just swords and shields. Enter the Domesday Book, England's most painstakingly detailed inventory, commissioned in 1085. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a tax audit mixed with a census, but with higher stakes, because non-compliance in those days could be a real pain in the neck, literally. This book wasn't just a dusty ledger, it was a tool of power. It catalogued everything from pigs to plowshares, offering William a comprehensive view of his new assets, and crucially, a way to squeeze revenue out of them. The details were mind-numbing. Over 13,000 places recorded, each with its own tale of wealth or woe. If you owned land, you were in the book. If you baked bread, you were in the book. If you so much as sneezed near a chicken, well, you get the idea. Now, this wasn't just about filling the royal coffers with coins. It was about control. By knowing who owned what and where, William could levy taxes with surgical precision. Imagine the ultimate GPS of medieval wealth, directing tax collectors like a maestro conducting an orchestra of coin. But why all the fuss about funds? To maintain power, of course. William had to pay for a standing army, a necessity when your throne rests on the pointy end of a sword, and military service came with a price tag, about £2 per night each year. Doesn't sound like much in today's terms, but back then it was a hefty sum. Picture an economy where a few pounds could buy land, and you'll see why this was serious business. Here's the kicker. The expense wasn't just in gold and silver. It was in the sweat and toil of countless peasants who had to work harder than ever to meet these demands. The nobles might have been the ones paying the knights, but it was the common folk who felt the squeeze. Fields had to yield more, hands had to work longer, and pockets had to dig deeper. Also, William could keep his grip on power. And speaking of power, let's not sugarcoat it. The Norman conquest was a brutal affair, but it wasn't just about battles and bloodshed. The real conquest unfolded in the balance sheets. William's strategy was as much about economics as it was about warfare. By leveraging the data from the Domesday Book, he could ensure that every penny or pence, to be historically accurate, counted. As the day progresses, you can almost hear the rustle of parchment as scribes tally up the wealth of the realm. It's a symphony of numbers, each one a testament to William's grip on his kingdom. But it's not just his realm. It's a mosaic of lives and livelihoods, all woven together in the tapestry of history. So, as you wander through this landscape of change, remember, the Norman conquest wasn't just a chapter in a history book. It was the story of a king who turned England into an accountant's dream, one entry at a time. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows over this ancient land, you can almost feel the weight of those ledgers, heavy with the price of power. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows over this ancient land, you can almost feel the weight of those ledgers, heavy with the price of power. Yet, as the ink dries on those Domesday pages, let's pivot from the numbers game to the power play that was the feudal system, William the Conqueror's grand chessboard of medieval politics. Now, if you're picturing knights in shining armor pledging eternal loyalty to their lord and king, hold that thought. But also, prepare to reframe it because, in reality, feudal loyalty was about as reliable as a medieval weather forecast. Sure, the feudal system was supposed to be a neat hierarchy where land equaled loyalty. A king like William would grant land to his nobles, who in turn would parcel it out to vassals, creating a pyramid of allegiance. But here's the kicker. Loyalty was more transactional than heartfelt. It was less about noble vows and more about quid pro quo. You scratch my back with land, and I'll scratch yours with troops, was the basic gist. William was no fool. He knew this system was only as strong as the ties he forged. Post-conquest England was a volatile cocktail of simmering resentments and raw ambition. Rebellions were as common as muddy roads, and trust was a luxury in short supply. To cement his hold, William had to be strategic with his land grants. It wasn't just about rewarding the loyal. It was about planting seeds of stability in a landscape of unrest. Enter the realpolitik of William's reign. He wasn't handing out land like party favors. Each grant was a calculated bet on a noble's loyalty, or at least their self-interest. Take Odo of Bayeux, William's half-brother. Awarded vast estates, Odo was a key player in maintaining Norman control. But here's the twist. Odo didn't just get land for being family. He got it because he was a power player, a bishop who could wield a sword as deftly as a sermon. William's land grants were less about blood ties and more about building a formidable roster of allies who could double as enforcers. You'd think these nobles, with their newfound wealth, would be paragons of feudal fidelity. Not so fast. The reality is, many were as likely to switch sides as they were to switch horses if it suited their ambitions. William's challenge was to keep these powerful vassals in line without letting them become too powerful. It was a balancing act worthy of any modern-day boardroom negotiation. Of course, the romance of feudalism paints a picture of knights galloping into battle for love of king and country. But the raw truth, it was more about the love of land and the perks that came with it. Knights were expensive to maintain. Remember that £2 per night we mentioned earlier? Well, multiply that by the dozens or even hundreds each noble might need to keep at the ready, and you start to see why land was the currency of loyalty. Land meant revenue, and revenue meant you could afford an army, or at least keep one at bay. William's land grants were also a practical response to rebellion hotspots. By placing trusted Normans in key areas, he could quash uprisings before they gained traction. It was like playing a game of Risk, where each piece on the board had the potential to change the outcome. But this wasn't a game, this was survival. And in the brutal world of medieval politics, survival meant being one step ahead of the next revolt. As you wander through this feudal landscape, it's tempting to see it as a bygone relic, a quaint system of knights and castles. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a world driven by the same forces that shape our own: power, ambition, and the eternal struggle to hold onto both. The feudal system wasn't just a structure. It was a living, breathing organism, constantly adapting to the whims of those who played the game. So, as you continue your journey through Norman Conqueror's day, remember this. The real conquest wasn't just about land or titles. It was about crafting a kingdom out of chaos, using every tool at his disposal. And while the myth of noble knights and chivalrous deeds endures, the reality was a gritty, often ruthless affair, where loyalty was a commodity and power the ultimate prize. Stay tuned, because the story doesn't stop here. There's more to uncover in this tapestry of intrigue and ambition, more layers to peel back as we dive deeper into the world William built and the legacy he left behind. And as we dive deeper into the world William built, let's take a stroll down the village lane, where the air is thick with the scent of change and mutton. It's midday in Norman England, and the social fabric is about as cozy as a woolen tunic in the rain. The Anglo-Saxon populace, with their old English chatter and time-tested traditions, are suddenly in the minority. They've swapped one set of overlords for another, but this time, the overlords come with a new language, new customs, and a penchant for, shall we say, overhauling the local culture. Now, you may have heard tales of brave knights and noble quests, but before you dive headfirst into that romanticized pool, let's talk about what life was really like for the common folk. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all jousts and jesters. The Norman conquest wasn't just a military takeover, it was a cultural collision. The French-speaking Normans brought with them a linguistic tidal wave that would forever alter the English language. Words like castle, court, and courage drifted across the channel, embedding themselves into everyday speech. Suddenly, the local tongue was spiced with French flair, creating what we'd eventually recognize as Middle English. And let's not forget the culinary revolution, or maybe revolution is too grand a term for what was, in essence, a culinary coup d'etat. Imagine your average Anglo-Saxon peasant used to a diet of bread, cheese, and whatever root vegetables they could coax from the stubborn English soil. Now, enter the Normans with their fancy notions of dining. The tables of the well-to-do were suddenly graced with exotic spices, like pepper and cinnamon, which, by the way, were worth their weight in gold, literally. Meat became a staple for those who could afford it, and feasting transformed into an art form, complete with courses and elaborate dishes like blancmange, a creamy concoction of chicken and almond milk. Meanwhile, the commoners continued to chew on their barley bread, occasionally glancing towards the manor house with a mix of envy and indigestion. But the most tangible shift was in the very structure of society. The Normans weren't just playing house, they were playing lord of the manor. Feudalism, that great pyramid scheme of medieval governance, was in full swing. And at the base of this pyramid were the peasants, known as villeins, tied to the land like barnacles to a ship. While the Anglo-Saxon ceorls, freemen, had enjoyed a smidgen of autonomy, the new Norman regime tightened the screws. Land wasn't just where you lived, it was where you owed your labor, a fact that the peasants were painfully aware of as they toiled from dawn till dusk in the fields. And while we're myth-busting, let's shatter the illusion of chivalry. The image of gallant knights rescuing damsels in distress is as accurate as a medieval map of the world. Chivalry was less about noble deeds and more about a code of conduct for the warrior class, a medieval PR campaign, if you will. Sure, there were rules about honor and loyalty, but these were selectively adhered to, especially when power and land were at stake. The reality, life was brutal, and the code of chivalry was more of a suggestion than a steadfast rule. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxon elite found themselves in a peculiar position. The old guard, the Thanes, had been sidelined, replaced by Norman barons who were carving up the countryside like a Sunday roast. The new rulers were eager to establish their dominance, building castles, over 500 by some estimates, across the landscape. These stone fortresses weren't just homes, they were symbols of power, projecting the might of the Norman elite, and offering a not-so-subtle reminder of who was in charge. The most famous, of course, being the Tower of London, commissioned by William himself, standing as a testament to Norman authority. But the cultural upheaval wasn't all doom and gloom. The melding of Anglo-Saxon and Norman traditions eventually led to a rich tapestry of art, literature, and architecture. The Romanesque style, with its rounded arches and thick walls, began to dominate the skyline, laying the groundwork for what would later become the Gothic grandeur of cathedrals. And in the literary world, the seeds of English storytelling were being sown, with epic tales that would captivate audiences for centuries. Economically, it was a mixed bag. While the Normans established a more centralized system of governance, which in theory should have streamlined trade and commerce, the reality was often less efficient. Taxes were heavy, and the constant demands for military support drained resources. However, the establishment of new towns and markets did stimulate local economies, albeit slowly. The wool trade began to flourish, setting the stage for England's emergence as a textile powerhouse. As you stand amidst this sea of change, it's clear that the Norman conquest was not just a moment in time, but a profound shift that reverberated through every aspect of life. The Anglo-Saxon way of life was gradually being woven into the Norman tapestry, a tapestry that was vibrant, complex, and far from seamless. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting a harsh light on this patchwork realm, remember that history is never a simple story. It's a mosaic of experiences, each tile a testament to the resilience and adaptability of those who lived through it. And while the narrative of knights and castles continues to enchant, the real story lies in the everyday lives of the people who tilled the fields, built the castles, and cooked the meals. The Norman conquest was as much a social and cultural transformation as it was a military victory. So as you wander through this landscape, take a moment to appreciate the threads of history that connect us to this distant past, a past that's as colorful and complex as the language we speak today. Stay tuned for more revelations as we journey further into the heart of Norman England, where the shadows of power and ambition continue to shape the world. And speaking of shadows that continue to shape the world, it's time to dig into the architectural and military innovations that were the crown jewels of Norman ingenuity. By now, you're probably picturing a picturesque landscape dotted with castles that look like they've been plucked straight from a fairy tale. But hold your trebuchets. These fortresses were less about romance and more about raw power. First on the docket, the Martin Bailey Castle. Sounds fancy, right? But in reality, it was the medieval equivalent of a pop-up fortress. Picture this, a wooden keep perched atop a mound of earth, the Mart, surrounded by a courtyard or bailey, all encircled by a ditch and palisade. This was the go-to design for the Normans, who were in a hurry to assert control over their new English lands. Why spend years building a stone fortress when you could slap together a mart and bailey in a matter of weeks? Speed was the name of the game, and these castles were the fast food of military architecture. But don't let their quick assembly fool you. These wooden wonders packed a punch. Strategically placed to dominate the surrounding countryside, they turned the landscape into a chessboard of power. By 1086, the Normans had erected over 500 of these strongholds across England. Each one was a physical declaration of authority, a constant reminder to the local populace of who held the reins. Now, while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion of castles as invincible fortresses. Sure, they look imposing, but the reality was messier. Wooden structures were vulnerable to fire, and any determined besieger with enough time and resources could eventually breach them. They were less about being impenetrable and more about projecting intimidation and control. And when a mart and bailey outlived its usefulness, or when the Normans had the luxury of time, they upgraded to stone fortresses. Think Windsor Castle, which started as a humble mart and bailey before evolving into the grand structure we know today. Moving on from castles to cavalry, let's talk about the Norman knights, the medieval equivalent of a sports car. These guys weren't just any horsemen, they were a finely tuned military machine. The Normans brought with them a revolutionary approach to warfare, heavily armored cavalry. This was a game-changer, folks. Picture knights clad in chainmail, mounted on powerful warhorses, charging across the battlefield like medieval tanks. It was as terrifying as it was effective. This cavalry force wasn't just for show. It was the backbone of Norman military might, a key factor in their success at the Battle of Hastings. The real innovation wasn't just the knights themselves, but their integration into a combined arms approach. With infantry and archers supporting the cavalry, the Normans could execute complex battlefield maneuvers that left their enemies scrambling. It was a tactical ballet, and the Normans were the prima ballerinas. But let's debunk the myth of Norman knights as invincible warriors. Sure, they were formidable, but they weren't invulnerable. The armor was heavy. Around 25 kilograms of chainmail wasn't exactly breezy, and their horses were massive targets. Plus, medieval battles were chaotic affairs. A well-placed arrow or a lucky swing from an axe could bring even the mightiest knight crashing down. The real power of the Norman cavalry lay in their discipline and strategy, not just their brute strength. Economically, maintaining these knights was no small feat. Remember that £2 per knight? That's just the base rate. Factor in the cost of equipment, horses, and support staff, and you're looking at a significant investment. But it was an investment that paid dividends in control and stability. The presence of a knightly force was often enough to deter rebellion and keep the local populace in line. And speaking of the local populace, let's not forget the human cost of these military advancements. For every mart raised and knight outfitted, there were countless peasants laboring in the fields, producing the wealth that made such feats possible. The Norman military machine was fueled by the sweat and toil of the common folk, a sobering reminder that behind every tale of chivalry and conquest lies a story of hard, often unacknowledged, labor. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting long shadows over this land of castles and cavalry, remember that the Norman conquest was as much about innovation as it was about domination. It was a period of rapid change, where new ideas reshaped the landscape and power dynamics of medieval England. But the story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more layers to peel back as we continue our journey through the heart of Norman England. Stay tuned, because the tapestry of history is woven with threads of intrigue, ambition, and the relentless march of time. And now, as the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows of those mighty Norman fortresses stretch long across the landscape, it's time to step back and take stock of what the conquest really left behind. Spoiler alert, it's more than just a string of castles and a few fancy French words. William the Conqueror didn't just change the landscape, he rewrote the entire script of English identity, law, and governance. It's like he took medieval England, shook it up, and watched what new shapes emerged from the chaos. Let's start with the law. Pre-conquest, England had a system of governance that was, let's say, loosey-goosey. Think of it as legal jazz, lots of improvisation, varying from one shire to the next. Enter the Normans with their penchant for order and record-keeping. William and his successors began compiling laws and customs, creating a more unified legal code. This wasn't just about keeping the peace, it was about control. A centralized system meant more power for the king, less for the local lords. It's the medieval version of a corporate merger, with the crown as the CEO pulling all the strings. And speaking of strings, let's talk about the puppet master behind it all, the feudal system. Remember that pyramid scheme of land and loyalty? Well, it didn't just dissolve with time, it evolved. The Normans introduced the idea of scutage, essentially a tax paid by vassals in lieu of military service. It was like saying, I'll skip the battle, but here's some cash to hire someone else to swing a sword in my place. This shift not only changed the dynamics of feudal obligations, but laid the groundwork for a more money-based economy, paving the way for the rise of a merchant class, and eventually the modern economic structure we recognize today. On the societal front, the Normans weren't exactly the warm and fuzzy types. Their arrival marked the beginning of a long and often painful process of cultural integration. The Anglo-Saxons were sidelined in their own land, their elite replaced by Norman nobles who spoke a language that sounded like a sophisticated version of gibberish. Over time, though, the two cultures intermingled, and a new English identity began to emerge. It was a slow burn, taking centuries, but by the time Chaucer penned the Canterbury Tales, the seeds of a uniquely English culture had well and truly taken root. But let's not get too rosy-eyed about this cultural mashup. The Norman conquest was also a catalyst for future conflicts and alliances that would shape the medieval world. The blending of cultures didn't happen without friction. The simmering tensions between the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons echoed through the ages, contributing to the 100 Years' War and even setting the stage for the Wars of the Roses. It's like the Normans dropped a cultural rock into a pond, and the ripples are still being felt centuries later. Now, here's where it gets meta. Let's chat about the story itself. The Norman conquest has been told and retold, each time with a slightly different twist. The victors, as they say, write history, and William's scribes were no exception. They painted him as the rightful king, a bringer of order and civilization. But history, my friends, is like a tapestry with threads missing, patches unseen. The stories of the common folk, the displaced Anglo-Saxon nobles, the silent suffering behind the grand narratives, those stories are often left in the shadows. Consider the famed Bayeux Tapestry. It's the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster movie, a visual recounting of the conquest. But it's also a piece of propaganda, highlighting Norman valor and downplaying the brutality. It's history with a filter, an early example of spin. The tapestry doesn't show the famine that followed William's harrying of the north or the countless lives appended by the new regime. It's a reminder that history is as much about what's left out as what's included. So, what's the takeaway from all this? The Norman conquest wasn't just a blip on the medieval radar. It was a seismic shift that altered the course of English history. It challenged old structures, forged new identities, and left a legacy that still resonates today. But let's not forget the human stories behind the grand narratives. The real legacy of the conquest is found in the everyday lives of those who lived through it, the peasants who toiled, the nobles who schemed, and the storytellers who spun tales of knights and kings. As you drift off into sleep, let this tale of conquest and change remind you that history is a living thing, a story that's constantly being rewritten. And just like those tapestries hanging in ancient halls, it's woven with threads of power, ambition, and the enduring human spirit. So next time you see a castle or hear a story of knights and kings, remember, there's always more lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Sweet dreams, and may your night be as rich with history as your day has been.